Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been putting this one off for a while now. Not because I didn't want to make it, but because I knew once I started pulling at this thread, I wasn't coming back. Regular Show. A show about two guys working at a park. That's the pitch. That's what you tell someone who's never seen it. Two guys work at a park, they slack off, and things get weird. And that description is technically accurate in the same way that saying the ocean is wet is technically accurate. It tells you nothing about what's actually underneath. And tonight, we're going underneath. Way, way underneath. So settle in. Get comfortable. If you're in bed, good. If you're on the couch, also good. Wherever you are, just let the screen go dark if you want. I'll be here. We're going to be here for a while, actually, because tonight we're doing the full Regular Show Iceberg, every layer. From the stuff your little cousin knows, to the stuff that'll make you sit up at 3 a.m. and go, wait, what? And if you haven't already, just tap that subscribe button. It really does help. And I genuinely appreciate everyone who sticks around for these deep dives. Now then, let's start where everyone starts. The surface. Regular Show premiered on Cartoon Network on September 6th, 2010. Created by J.G. Quintel, it ran for 8 seasons and 244 episodes, finally wrapping up on January 16th, 2017. And I think a lot of people forget just how long this show was actually on the air. 7 years. That's a significant chunk of a lot of people's childhoods. And for some of us, a significant chunk of our teenage years and even early 20s. The premise is straightforward enough on paper. Mordecai, a 6-foot-tall blue jay, and Rigby, a much shorter raccoon, work as groundskeepers at a park. Their boss is Benson, a living gumball machine with an anger management problem. Their co-workers include Skips, an immortal yeti who gets around exclusively by skipping. Pops, a naive, lollipop-headed man who is the son of the park's owner. Muscle Man, a stocky green guy who will not stop making my mom jokes. And High Five Ghost, a literal ghost with a hand sticking out of his head. Now here's what made Regular Show different from basically everything else on Cartoon Network at the time. The characters are all clearly adults. They're not kids going on adventures. They're not teenagers navigating high school. They're dudes in their 20s with dead-end jobs who would rather play video games and eat junk food than do any actual work. And every single episode follows the same beautiful formula. Mordecai and Rigby are given a simple task. They slack off or do something stupid. And the situation escalates wildly until it becomes a life or death scenario involving monsters or demons or interdimensional beings or, I don't know, a sentient British taxicab. And then everything resets by the next episode. It shouldn't work. On paper, it sounds repetitive, but in practice, it was one of the freshest things animation had seen in years. The voice cast is part of what made it click so perfectly. J.G. Quintel himself voices Mordecai, and if you listen closely, also High Five Ghost. William Salyers voices Rigby, with that raspy, nasally energy that just is the character. Sam Marin, Quintel's friend from CalArts, does triple duty voicing: Benson, Pops, and Muscle Man. 3 completely distinct characters that he switches between effortlessly. And then you've got Mark Hamill, yes, Luke Skywalker himself, voicing Skips, just casually delivering wisdom and punching monsters every week on a Cartoon Network show. Janie Haddad voices Margaret, the Robin who works at the coffee shop across from the park, and who Mordecai is painfully, obviously in love with for the first few seasons. And honestly, the chemistry of this cast is something you just can't manufacture. A lot of these people knew each other before the show even existed. They grew up together creatively, and you can feel that in every single scene. And speaking of the coffee shop, let's talk about the world of the park for a second. Because the park isn't just a setting, it's a character in itself. You've got the house where most of the guys live and work. You've got the coffee shop across the street where Margaret and later Eileen work. You've got the snack bar, the cart they drive around. There's something about this world that just feels lived in, you know? Like you could walk around the corner and find Benson yelling at someone about the fountain not being cleaned. It has that hangout energy that the best slice of life shows have. Except every hangout can end with someone being dragged to the underworld. The show landed right in the middle of what people now call the Cartoon Network Renaissance. You've got Adventure Time premiering the same year. The Amazing World of Gumball comes along in 2011. Steven Universe in 2013. This era, roughly 2010 to 2018, was when Cartoon Network pulled itself out of a pretty rough period of live-action shows and CN Real experiments. and came back swinging with some of the best animated content the network had ever produced. And Regular Show was right there at the forefront of that. It won a Primetime Emmy Award in 2012 for Outstanding Short Format Animated Program for the episode Eggcellent, which we are absolutely going to talk about later. The show was also nominated for 6 Emmy Awards total, plus 7 Annie Awards and 3 British Academy Children's Awards, for a show about 2 slackers at a park. Just think about that. Now, the most popular episodes, the ones that everyone remembers. The Power is the pilot, Season 1, Episode 1. Mordecai and Rigby find a magical keyboard that can make anything happen when you say it while playing. They use it to give themselves a raise, and accidentally send Skips to the moon. It sets the tone for everything that comes after. Simple premise, completely unhinged escalation, and it introduced some of the show's sharpest early dialogue. The original broadcast had Mordecai saying, "How in the H are we going to fix this S?" which got censored in every rerun after 2012 to "How in the heck are we going to fix this stuff?" which honestly tells you a lot about where the show's sense of humor lived. Right on that edge. Hello Governor is the Season 2 premiere, and it's one of those episodes that people who watched the show as kids still remember as genuinely scary. Rigby watches a horror movie about a possessed British taxicab and becomes traumatized. The taxi starts showing up in real life, chasing him. It's a parody of Stephen King's Christine, and it works beautifully because the show commits to the horror completely. The taxi is voiced by Mark Hamill, by the way, because of course it is. The man voiced both the most calming presence on the show and a demonic car. And then there's A Bunch of Baby Ducks, Season 2, Episode 23, which aired June 6th, 2011. Mordecai and Rigby find baby ducks in the park fountain, and the ducks imprint on them. It's cute and funny, and then it becomes a mech battle anime parody where the ducks combine into a giant humanoid duck warrior. And that right there is Regular Show in a nutshell. You start with something mundane, something relatable, and by the end, you're watching a giant duck robot punch things. And somehow, it doesn't feel random. It feels earned. But before we go deeper, I want to linger on the surface level for a bit more, because the early episodes set up so much of what the show would become, and I think people rush past them. Just Set Up the Chairs is only the 2nd episode, and it already establishes the formula perfectly. Mordecai and Rigby are asked to do one simple thing: set up chairs for a birthday party. They don't want to do it. They'd rather play a video game, and their attempt to weasel out of the task leads to them accidentally unleashing a horde of destructive arcade characters into the real world. That's the template. That's every Regular Show episode distilled into its purest form. A simple task, laziness, escalation, chaos, resolution. And the fact that it's the 2nd episode ever tells you Quintel had the formula locked down from the start. Grilled Cheese Deluxe, Episode 7 of Season 1, is another one that deserves more attention than it gets. Rigby eats Benson's grilled cheese sandwich, and Benson sends them to buy a replacement. Simple enough. But then Mordecai and Rigby get into a lying competition, each one trying to outlie the other, and the lies spiral into increasingly elaborate fabrications. They tell people they're astronauts. They fabricate entire backstories. And the whole thing escalates until the lies become literally dangerous. It's a great early example of the show's understanding that the most mundane human impulses, in this case the desire to avoid consequences, can lead to the most extraordinary situations. And Caffeinated Concert Tickets, Episode 4. Mordecai and Rigby need money to buy tickets to see their favorite band, Fist Pump. So they have to actually work. Like, really work. And Benson, for once, is pleased with them. But then they discover coffee, and the caffeine turns them into hyper-productive work machines. And then the caffeine wears off at the worst possible moment. And then it becomes a thing. I love this episode because it's one of the earliest examples of the show taking a totally relatable experience, the desperate hustle to afford concert tickets when you're broke, and turning it into something surreal without losing the emotional core. Prank Callers, Episode 9 of Season 1, aired November 1st, 2010. This one is special because it's one of the show's first time travel episodes. Mordecai and Rigby try to prank call their hero, the master prank caller, and it backfires spectacularly. They get sent back to 1982, the year 1982. And I mention the specific year because the show's obsession with the early 80s starts right here, in the 9th episode, The park crew ends up in 1982, being chased by the master prank caller through a neon-soaked version of the past, and they have to prank him back to escape. It's fun and silly, and it's also the first time the show tips its hand that it has a deep nostalgic love for a very specific era. Everything that comes later, all the 80s music, all the movie homages, the VHS aesthetic, it starts here. Rigby's Body, episode 11, is low-key one of the creepier early episodes. Rigby eats so much junk food that his body literally separates from him and starts walking around on its own. His body has had enough of him. It quits. And another consciousness takes over his abandoned body. It's played for laughs, but there's something unsettling about the idea that your own body can just leave you if you mistreat it enough. It's body horror disguised as a Cartoon Network comedy, and it's one of the earliest hints that the show was willing to go to genuinely weird, dark places. And then Mordecai and the Rigbys, the season 1 finale. This is the one with Party Tonight, the song that became a genuine hit. Mordecai and Rigby form a band and lip-sync to a demo tape at a concert, only for future versions of themselves to show up and expose the fraud. The song Party Tonight was originally sung by Sean Seelys, one of the show's storyboard artists, and then re-recorded by J.G. Quintel for the final version. It became so popular that when the Regular Show Facebook page hit 1 million likes on March 10th, 2012, Cartoon Network released an exclusive live-action music video with humanoid costumes of the characters, and briefly, a real raccoon standing in for Rigby. They made a live-action music video for a song from a cartoon about a fake band, and it worked. The song's guitar style is inspired by Slash, and the composition references Blinded by the Light by Manfred Mann's Earth Band and Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits. For an 11-minute cartoon episode, that's an absurd level of musical sophistication. Okay, so now we're actually moving off the surface, sinking a little deeper. This is where the casual viewers might start learning something new, where the fans who watched every episode start nodding along going, yeah, I remember that. Before we get into the character deep dives, I want to sit with the show's treatment of work for a minute, because I think this is one of the most overlooked aspects of Regular Show, and it's something that becomes more relevant the older you get. Mordecai and Rigby are groundskeepers. They mow lawns. They clean up trash. They set up events. It's unglamorous, low-paying, repetitive work that doesn't lead anywhere. And the show is honest about that. It never pretends the park is a stepping stone to something better. It never frames their work as meaningful in the way that, say, a hospital drama frames medicine as meaningful. The work is just work. It's the thing they do to survive, so they can do the things they actually care about, which is hang out with each other and play video games. And yet, the show also shows that the community built around that work is valuable. The friendships, the shared experiences, the inside jokes, the moments of unexpected heroism. All of that happens at work. All of that happens because they showed up to a boring job at a park and stayed long enough for it to matter. I think there's a lot of people watching this who are in similar situations, working jobs that don't feel meaningful, wondering if this is all there is. And Regular Show says, the job doesn't have to be meaningful. The people you do it with, the life you build around it, that's the meaning. That's the whole point. The show also has this really sharp understanding of the specific dynamics of a workplace friend group. Mordecai and Rigby are best friends who happen to become coworkers. Benson is the boss they resent, but secretly respect. Skips is the veteran who's seen everything and doesn't get ruffled. Muscle Man is the guy you don't like at first, but who grows on you over time. Pops is the eccentric one everyone protects. High Five Ghost is the quiet one who's always there, but never the center of attention. If you've ever worked at a restaurant or a retail store or any kind of service job, you know these archetypes. You've met these people. The show captures the energy of a workplace where nobody particularly wants to be there, but everyone ends up caring about each other anyway. And it does it with a specificity that feels drawn from real experience. Because it is. Quintel worked those kinds of jobs. He knew what it was like. And this extends to the dynamic between Mordecai and Rigby as workers. Mordecai is slightly more responsible. He cares a little bit more about not getting fired. Rigby doesn't care at all. And this creates a tension that drives a lot of episodes. Mordecai is constantly pulled between doing the right thing and doing the fun thing. And Rigby is always there, tugging him toward fun. It's the angel and devil on your shoulders, except they're both your best friend, and one of them is a raccoon. That dynamic is the engine of the entire show, and it works because both sides are sympathetic. You understand why Mordecai wants to be responsible. You also understand why Rigby doesn't see the point, and the show never fully sides with either of them. Sometimes doing the work is the right call. Sometimes slacking off leads to the adventure of a lifetime. The show is ambivalent about this in a way that feels genuinely honest, because real life is ambivalent about it too. Let's talk about the "my mom" jokes. Muscle Man's entire running gag throughout the series is telling these botched "yo mama" jokes, except he always says "my mom" instead. So he's technically insulting his own mother every single time. You know who else likes to go to the park? My mom. High Five Ghost is the only one who laughs. Everyone else just groans. And here's the thing about Muscle Man. He might seem like the most one-dimensional character on the surface, but he actually gets some of the most significant character development in the entire show. He's got a genuine, complicated relationship with his girlfriend Starla, who he's known since high school. They break up and get back together. They deal with real issues of communication and insecurity. And by the end of the show, in the season 6 finale, Dumped at the Altar, they get married. And in the series finale, they have a daughter. Muscle Man, the "my mom" joke guy, becomes a father. That's character development, people. And speaking of relationships, we need to talk about the love triangle. Because for a kids show, Regular Show handled romance with a level of emotional complexity that caught a lot of people off guard. Mordecai's crush on Margaret is one of the show's core early arcs. He's painfully awkward around her. He overthinks everything. He can barely form sentences when she's near. And after seasons of buildup, in the season 4 finale, Stake Me Amadeus, he finally works up the courage to ask Margaret to be his girlfriend. And she says no. Not because she doesn't care about him, but because she got accepted into her dream college, Milton University, and she can't stay. She runs out of the restaurant crying. Mordecai is devastated, and the park crew just watches, helpless. It's genuinely heartbreaking. The title is a pun on Stake Me Amadeus and Rock Me Amadeus by Falco, and somehow that makes it funnier and sadder at the same time. After Margaret leaves, Mordecai eventually starts dating CJ, short for Cloudy J, a cloud person who's actually really cool and compatible with him. But then Margaret comes back in season 6, and things get messy. There's a kiss that happens in front of CJ. There's jealousy. There's miscommunication. There's an episode literally called Not Great Double Date from season 6, episode 25, that aired June 22nd, 2015. And eventually in Dumped at the Altar, at Muscle Man's wedding of all places, the whole thing falls apart. CJ and Mordecai break up. Margaret and Mordecai don't get back together. And honestly, this was one of the most polarizing arcs in the entire show. Fans were furious. They felt like Mordecai was written as indecisive and frustrating. Some fans were Team Margaret, some were Team CJ, and a lot of people felt like the writers didn't handle the resolution well. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. Isn't that kind of realistic? Isn't that how it actually works when you're in your 20s and you don't know what you want? Sometimes there's no clean ending. Sometimes you just mess it up. And the show had the guts to portray that honestly. And the payoff for Mordecai's love life doesn't come until the very end, and it's one of the wildest choices any animated show has ever made. But we'll get there. That one's deep in the iceberg. But let me back up and trace the Mordecai-Margaret arc from the beginning, because the buildup is where the show really shines. In the early seasons, Mordecai can barely function around Margaret. Butt Dial from season 3 is a perfect example. Mordecai accidentally pocket dials Margaret and leaves a humiliating voicemail. The entire episode is him trying to delete the message before she hears it. It's 11 minutes of pure secondhand embarrassment, and it's brilliant because everyone has had that moment. That moment where technology betrays you and the person you like might hear exactly how you feel about them before you're ready to say it. The show takes that universally relatable anxiety and, naturally, escalates it into a supernatural situation, but the emotional core is real. And then there's Bad Kiss, the season 3 finale. Mordecai finally kisses Margaret. Finally. After seasons of will they, won't they. And his breath is so bad that he needs to go back in time to redo it. He literally uses a time machine to fix a bad first kiss. And I love this because it's simultaneously absurd and deeply honest. Who hasn't wished they could go back and redo a moment they botched? The show just makes the metaphor literal. You can't undo your mistakes, even with a time machine. You just have to live with them and try to do better next time. Camping Can Be Cool is another important Margaret-adjacent episode, where Mordecai and Rigby take Margaret and Eileen camping. This is where Eileen's crush on Rigby starts to become visible, because Eileen impresses Rigby by starting a fire without matches, and Rigby, for the first time, thinks she's kind of cool. It's such a small moment, but it's the seed that grows into one of the show's best slow-burn relationships. That's what Regular Show does better than almost any other animated show I can think of. It plants tiny seeds in otherwise standalone episodes and lets them grow across seasons. And after Margaret leaves at the end of season 4, the show doesn't skip over Mordecai's grief. Laundry Woes is the season 5 premiere, and it finds Mordecai still depressed. He discovers Margaret's sweater in the laundry and decides to return it to her at college. It's a quiet episode by Regular Show standards, but it's an important one because it shows that the show takes its characters' emotions seriously. Mordecai isn't just over it the next episode. He's hurting, he's processing, and the show gives him the space to do that. Then CJ enters the picture, Cloudy J, and the way Mordecai meets her is perfectly awkward. In I Like You High, an auto-corrected text sends the wrong message, and the whole episode is Mordecai trying to explain that he didn't mean to send what he sent. It's another communication disaster episode, another story about the gap between what you feel and what you manage to express. And it's another entry in the show's ongoing thesis that relationships are hard and messy, and sometimes your phone ruins everything. Let me pull you back to something lighter for a second. Excellent. Season 3, Episode 17, aired February 27th, 2012. This is the episode that won the Emmy. Rigby tries to complete a food challenge at a restaurant, eating a 12-egg omelet with chili, cheese, 2 biscuits, and a fruit bowl in under an hour. The prize is a hat. A trucker hat that says, "I'm Excellent." Rigby has an allergic reaction to the eggs and falls into a coma. The doctor tells the park crew he might die, and Mordecai makes a promise. He's going to win that hat for Rigby. What follows is genuinely one of the most emotionally charged 11-minute episodes of animation I've ever seen. Mordecai trains for the challenge. There's a training montage set to You're the Best by Joe Esposito from The Karate Kid. And then there's a twist where, if you succeed, you're transported to a cave full of hats. And if you pick the wrong one, you die. Mordecai picks the right hat, puts it on Rigby's head, and Rigby wakes up from the coma. And the whole thing was inspired by an actual restaurant. J.G. Quintel based the challenge on a similar one at the Broken Yoke Cafe in San Diego. That's real. That's a real place. And it gave us one of the best episodes of the entire show. Let me also touch on Excellent Challenge as a follow-up, because the show actually returned to this premise. The hat becomes a recurring element. It shows up again. And the fact that the show treats a trucker hat as a legitimate plot device, as something worth risking your life for, is one of those things that shouldn't work, but absolutely does. Because the hat isn't about the hat. The hat is about respect. It's about proving yourself. It's about completing something that everyone said was impossible. It's about ego and pride, and the very human need to accomplish something, even something trivial, just to prove you can. And that's a feeling that resonates, whether you're Mordecai, training for a food challenge, or you're a real person, trying to accomplish something that nobody else thinks matters. The show understood that the scale of the goal doesn't determine the weight of the effort. A trucker hat can mean as much as a diploma if you care about it enough. Okay, personal tangent here. I watched Excellent for the first time when I was, I think, 16. And I remember being genuinely moved by it. Like, actually tearing up. And I felt kind of embarrassed about that because I thought, it's a cartoon. It's about a hat. But the thing about Regular Show is that it was never really about the hats or the keyboards or the baby ducks. It was always about the relationships. The hat didn't matter. What mattered was that Mordecai loved his friend enough to risk everything for a dumb trucker hat, because Rigby wanted it. And that's what the show understood about friendship, that a lot of shows don't. Let's keep going deeper. This is where things start getting into the mid-tier of the iceberg. Production details. Hidden references. The stuff that rewards you for paying attention. First, the 80s. Regular Show is absolutely soaked in 80s pop culture. The music, the movie references, the visual aesthetic when things go weird. The show licensed real songs, mostly from the 80s. You'd hear Working for the Weekend by Loverboy playing while Mordecai and Rigby are mowing lawns. We're Not Gonna Take It by Twisted Sister shows up at a karaoke bar. You're the Best by Joe Esposito in Excellent. The show also made direct visual and narrative homages to movies like Over the Top, the 1987 Sylvester Stallone arm wrestling movie, which became the basis for the Season 2 episode Over the Top, where Skips arm wrestles death. The Weir Skunk transformation in one episode is a clear nod to the Monster Squad from 1987. The fake movie Zombocalypse 3D is basically a mashup of Dawn of the Dead and Evil Dead. Even the character design of the unicorns in The Unicorns Have Got to Go, the 8th episode of Season 1, has direct references, with one unicorn designed to look like Billy Idol, another like comedian Gallagher, and one resembling Alex DeLarge from A Clockwork Orange. And I think this is where the show found its dual audience. Kids watched it and thought the crazy escalation was funny. Adults watched it and caught all the references to movies and songs they grew up with. Regular Show was, in many ways, a love letter to the pop culture of the 80s and 90s, wrapped in a 21st century cartoon. It was nostalgic without being pandering, referential without being lazy. And let me tell you, the gaming references are just as deep as the movie and music ones. Quintel is a genuine gamer. His love of video games was based on his experience playing Sega Master System titles with his brother growing up. And that love permeates the show. High Score, Season 2, Episode 7, aired February 7th, 2011, is basically a love letter to arcade culture. Mordecai and Rigby try to beat the universe record on an arcade game called Broken Bones, which is basically Excitebike with a scoring system. The current champion is Garrett Bobby Ferguson, the giant floating bearded head. And the game, the rivalry, the obsession with getting the high score, that's not just a plot device. That's Quintel drawing from a real culture of arcade competition that defined gaming in the 80s. The fact that the high score rival is a giant floating head who literally explodes when he loses is the Regular Show twist on it, but the underlying love for arcade culture is genuine. Video Game Wizards from Season 3 is another one. Mordecai and Rigby enter a tournament to win the Maximum Glove, a prototype controller that you wear on your hand, which is a direct parody of the Nintendo Power Glove and a reference to the 1989 movie The Wizard. The tournament itself is called Game Inferno, which sounds like something straight out of an 80s movie. And the episode captures that specific energy of gaming tournaments, the competitiveness, the spectacle, the absurdity of taking a children's toy this seriously. But it does it with genuine affection, not mockery. Quintel isn't making fun of gamers. He is one, and you can feel the difference. Weekend at Benson's is another episode that deserves a deeper look. Season 3, Episode 13. The title is a play on the 1989 movie Weekend at Bernie's, and the premise follows a similar structure. Mordecai and Rigby accidentally knock Benson unconscious and have to pretend he's awake while carrying him around. It's a simple comedy setup, but the episode is significant because it's one of the first times the show lets us see Benson outside of his role as manager. We see his apartment. We see his dating life, or lack thereof. We see that outside the park, Benson is kind of lonely. It humanizes him in a way that the workplace episodes can't, and it sets up the slow, emotional arc of Benson becoming more than just the angry boss. And while we're in the shallow water section of this iceberg, let me talk about something that I think goes underappreciated. The show's treatment of High Five Ghost. He's probably the least developed of the main cast for most of the series, often functioning as Muscle Man's sidekick and occasional straight man. He's a ghost. He has a hand sticking out of his head that he high-fives people with. And for a while, that's about it. But the show gradually gives him his own storyline. In Season 5, The Postcard introduces his love interest, Celia, a woman he met at a cafe 4 years earlier. They had an immediate connection, but she had to leave for Prague. And the only way they could stay in touch was through postcards, because neither of them had a phone. When she finally sends one, High Five Ghost can't read her handwriting. He goes on this whole journey trying to decipher the postcard, eventually gives up, and then by chance walks into the cafe where they first met, and there she is. They hold hands. They start dating. And by the finale, they're married. They've become famous DJs. and they have a son. It's a complete romantic arc, start to finish, for a character who most people would write off as a joke. And the fact that it happens mostly in the background, in small moments across multiple seasons, makes it feel more real than if they dedicated whole episodes to it. Sometimes, the best love stories are the ones that happen quietly while you're paying attention to something else. Now, Over the Top, Season 2, Episode 21, aired May 23rd, 2011. This is a crucial episode for the lore because it introduces the character Death, voiced by Julian Holloway in his first appearance, and then regularly by Julian Holloway throughout. In this episode, Skips accidentally kills Rigby during an arm wrestling match. Just straight up kills him. And to get him back, Skips has to arm wrestle Death himself. Death is depicted as a massive, intimidating figure with one comically oversized muscular right arm, and he becomes a recurring character throughout the series, showing up in episodes like Dead at 8, where Mordecai and Rigby have to babysit Death's son Thomas in order to save Muscle Man's life. Death in Regular Show is not a metaphor. He's a literal personified entity who keeps popping up because the main characters keep getting into situations where they should logically die, and the show just rolls with it. Here's something most people don't realize about the show's animation. Regular Show was animated traditionally, by hand, on paper. In an era when digital animation was becoming the norm, Quintel insisted on keeping things hand-drawn because he felt it was more organic and better represented each individual artist's style. The rough storyboards would be drawn, then sent to Saram Animation in South Korea for the final animation production. Each episode took about 9 months to complete, with a 35-person team at Cartoon Network Studios in Burbank. 9 months for 11 minutes. That level of craft is something you can actually see if you go back and watch the show now. There's a fluidity and warmth to the animation that you don't get from purely digital productions. And while we're on production, let's talk about the original concept. In early development, the show was called Normal Show, and the premise was about animals taking care of humans on display in a zoo, which is such a wildly different concept that it's hard to even imagine. But Quintel eventually pivoted to the park setting, and I think that was the right call. The park allows for that beautiful, everyday mundanity that makes the supernatural escalation hit so much harder. If the setting was already weird, the weirdness wouldn't land the same way. Here's another production detail that speaks to how the show was made. In 2008, Quintel pitched Regular Show for the Cartoonstitute project at Cartoon Network, and the way he pitched it is telling. He used a storyboard, not a verbal pitch. His reasoning was that verbally pitching such an odd concept wouldn't have made sense to anyone, and I think that's actually a profound insight into the show's DNA. Regular Show is a show that doesn't make sense when you describe it. It only makes sense when you see it. When you experience the rhythm and the escalation and the emotional beats firsthand. You can't explain to someone why a giant floating head exploding is both hilarious and somehow thematically resonant. You just have to show them. And Quintel understood that from the very beginning, which is why he drew it instead of talking about it. In August 2009, Cartoon Network greenlit the project, and the rest is history. But that moment, the decision to let the art speak for itself, rather than trying to verbalize the indescribable, that's the kind of creative confidence that separates good showrunners from great ones. And here's a mid-tier iceberg fact that blew my mind when I first learned it. The show's theme song, that 9-second synth intro that plays before every episode. It's so iconic, so embedded in the DNA of the show, that you probably hear it in your head right now just thinking about it. But the thing about the theme is that it was composed to sound exactly like something from the 80s. It could be a synthesizer riff from a John Carpenter movie, or a forgotten Tangerine Dream album. It sets the tone instantly. You hear those notes, and you're in the world. You're at the park. It's another day. And something insane is about to happen. The brevity of it matters too. 9 seconds. That's it. No lyrics, no extended intro, just a quick synth hit, and you're in. It's the musical equivalent of the show's storytelling philosophy. Get to the point. Keep it simple. Let the work speak for itself. Let me also talk about how the show handled its episode structure. because there's a hidden sophistication there that most people don't notice. Every episode is 11 minutes long. That's half the runtime of most animated shows. And within those 11 minutes, the show has to establish a setup, escalate it to absurdity, reach a climax, and resolve it. That's an incredibly tight structure. There's no room for fat, no room for filler. Every line has to either advance the plot, build character, or land a joke. And ideally, it does all three at once. Writing an 11-minute episode of Regular Show was in some ways harder than writing a 22-minute episode of a more traditional show, because the compression demands a level of precision that's almost surgical. And the fact that they maintained that quality across 244 episodes is kind of astounding. I want to bring up Benson Be Gone real quick, because it's an important episode for the show's mythology, and it often gets overlooked. Benson gets demoted by Mr. Maillard and replaced by a new manager named Susan. Susan seems competent and professional at first, but she turns out to be a demon who transforms anyone who works for her into copies of herself. It's a corporate horror story disguised as a kid's cartoon. The metaphor of a toxic boss who literally absorbs her employees into herself, who eliminates individuality and replaces it with conformity. That's not subtle. It's a critique of corporate culture wrapped in supernatural horror, and it aired on a network primarily watched by 10-year-olds. That's Regular Show for you. And Think Positive is another Benson episode that hits different when you're an adult. Pops orders Benson to stop yelling at Mordecai and Rigby, literally tells him he's not allowed to raise his voice. And Benson has to comply because Pops is technically his boss when Mr. Maillard isn't around. So Benson bottles up all his anger. He represses it. He holds it in. And it builds and builds and builds until he physically can't contain it anymore, and he explodes in the most cathartic scream in the entire series. It's an episode about the cost of suppressing your emotions, about how telling someone to just be calm is often the opposite of helpful. And for a show aimed at children, it's a surprisingly nuanced take on emotional regulation and the harm of forced positivity. Okay, the real Thomas. This is one of those mid-iceberg entries that absolutely blew people's minds when it aired. Season 6, Episode 8. Thomas, the park's intern. The boring, forgettable guy who showed up in Season 4. Turns out he's a Russian spy named Nikolai. His real mission was to infiltrate the park and steal it for Russia using rockets, because Russia wanted to improve their parks program. His pizza delivery costume was actual spyware, with cameras hidden in the pepperoni. I'm not making any of this up. When Russia tries to blow up the park instead of stealing it, Thomas turns on his handlers to save his friends and goes on the run, hunted by both the American and Russian governments. This episode was banned in Russia because the premise of Thomas being a Russian spy was considered offensive. In countries like the UK and Australia, it aired but with Russian references cut or altered. And the wildest part is that Thomas just leaves. He's gone. Benson offers him a chance to stay, and he says no, and that's basically the last we see of him. For a character who seemed like a background player, he got one of the most dramatic exits in the whole series. Another thing people don't talk about enough is how Regular Show handled its specials. Exit 9B, the Season 4 premiere, is a half-hour special where Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr. opens a portal to bring back every villain from the first 3 seasons. Every single one. It's like an Avengers-level crossover event, but for Regular Show villains. And it works because the show had been quietly building this villain roster across dozens of seemingly standalone episodes. Garrett Bobby Ferguson himself, the giant floating bearded head from High Score, is a parody of real-life arcade champion Billy Mitchell. And Billy Mitchell actually sued Cartoon Network over the character in 2015. The case was thrown out. The judge noted that GBF is a giant floating head from outer space who literally explodes when he loses, which is sufficiently different from a human being. That's a real legal ruling that exists in the world. A judge had to officially rule that a giant exploding floating head is not the same as Billy Mitchell. We're getting deeper now. Let's talk about Benson, because Benson is, I think, the most underappreciated character in the entire show. On the surface, he's the angry boss. He yells. He threatens to fire Mordecai and Rigby every episode. His face turns red. He's the authority figure that exists to be frustrated. But the show gives him a backstory that is genuinely tragic. In 150-piece kit, we learn that Benson was a drummer. Not just any drummer. He was the drummer for a band called Heir to the Throne, and he performed a legendary drum solo on a 150-piece drum kit for their first album. It was supposed to be his big break, but the band left him completely uncredited. They kicked him out after 6 months and replaced him with a drum machine called the Drumatron 6. His dream was stolen from him by people he trusted. And then there's his childhood. Benson's family would argue constantly at the dinner table. Young Benson would try to speak up and ask his father to pass the salt, but he'd say it too quietly, and his father would tell him he'd never get anything in life unless he yelled for it. His father never approved of his drumming, told him he had no talent, told him to get a real job. So Benson's anger, his constant yelling, his need for control, it all comes from this deep well of pain and inadequacy. He's not just an angry boss. He's a man who was taught that the only way to be heard is to scream, and even then, no one really listens. That's devastatingly real for a character who is literally a gumball machine. And here's a callback for you. Remember how I said Muscle Man gets surprising character development? Benson does too. Over the course of the series, you see him slowly learn to trust Mordecai and Rigby. He never stops yelling, but the nature of the yelling changes. Early on, it's frustration and contempt. By the later seasons, it's more like a parent who cares too much. There's a genuine warmth that develops. And by the finale, when the whole crew is in space fighting for the fate of the universe, Benson is right there with them. And he's not there because it's his job. He's there because these people are his family. And here's another thing about Benson that I don't see people talk about enough. The show actually gives him a love life, and it's heartbreaking. He dates Audrey in season 4, and there's a real tenderness to those episodes. You see a side of Benson that the workplace episodes never show. He's gentle. He's nervous. He tries too hard. And when things don't work out, he handles it the same way he handles everything, by throwing himself into his work and pretending he doesn't care. Benson uses the park the same way Mordecai and Rigby use video games. It's a distraction from the parts of life that hurt. The difference is that Benson's distraction looks productive from the outside, which means nobody ever tells him to stop. Nobody says, "Hey man, maybe you should deal with your feelings instead of obsessively managing this park." And that's a really sharp observation about how society treats different coping mechanisms. If your coping mechanism looks like hard work, nobody questions it, even if it's slowly destroying you. The episode 150 Piece Kit is where Benson's story really crystallizes, though. He first shows his drumming skills earlier, in This Is My Jam, where he beats a supernatural enemy through the power of pure musical talent. But 150 Piece Kit is where we get the full story. The band, the betrayal, the replacement by a machine, and the climax of the episode, where Benson has to prove himself by playing against the Drumatron 6 in a drumming competition, is one of the most satisfying moments in the entire series. He wins. He proves he's better than the machine that replaced him. And it doesn't undo the past. It doesn't give him back the career that was stolen from him, but it gives him closure. It lets him know that he was good enough. He was always good enough. They just didn't let him show it. Alright, personal tangent number 2. I think Benson is the character most adults relate to when they rewatch Regular Show. Because when you're a kid watching this show, Benson is the killjoy. He's the guy ruining the fun. But when you grow up and you've worked a job where you're responsible for people who won't do their work, when you've had a dream that got crushed, when you've tried to be heard and couldn't be, Benson stops being the villain and starts being the most human character on the show. That shift in perspective is one of the most beautiful things about rewatching this series as an adult. Okay, going deeper. We're past the mid-tier now. We're entering the waters where only the dedicated fans swim. The deep lore, the hidden continuity, the stuff that Quintel embedded for the people who are really paying attention. Skips. Let's finally talk about Skips properly. Mark Hamill voices this character, and he gives him this quiet, weathered gravity that makes every scene Skips is in feel grounded. But Skips has a secret. His real name isn't Skips. It's Walks. Skip's story, from season 5, is one of the best episodes the show ever produced, and it reveals that Skips was once a teenage Yeti named Walks who was reckless, energetic, and in love. He had a girlfriend named Mona, and a villain named Clorgbane killed her. In his grief and rage, Walks was given the Fists of Justice, magical gauntlets that allowed him to defeat Clorgbane and send him hurtling into the cosmos. After losing Mona, Walks made a vow to always skip instead of walk, as a tribute to the way she moved. And he was granted immortality, so he could guard against Clorgbane's return every 157 years. So every time you see Skips casually skipping around the park, fixing things, giving sage advice, remember that this is a man carrying centuries of grief. He skips because the love of his life died, and he promised he would never walk again. That's his memorial. Every single step is an act of remembrance, and the show never makes a big deal out of it. It just is. That restraint is what makes it so devastating. And here's where things connect. Skip's immortality, his knowledge, his ability to fix literally anything, it all makes sense once you know his backstory. He's been alive for hundreds of years. Of course he knows how to fix the cart. Of course he knows about interdimensional portals. Of course he's calm in a crisis. He's seen everything. He's lost everything. Nothing phases him anymore, because the worst thing that could happen to him already did, centuries ago. And there's something else about Skips that I want to linger on, because it touches on one of the iceberg's darker implications. Skips has watched everyone around him grow old and die for centuries. Every friend he's ever made has aged while he stayed the same. Every connection has been temporary for him in a way that it isn't for anyone else. And yet, he keeps connecting. He keeps caring. He keeps showing up at the park, doing his job, helping these 20-somethings deal with their problems, knowing that eventually they'll leave, and he won't. That's not just sad. That's heroic. The bravest thing Skips does in the entire series isn't fighting Clorgbane or arm wrestling death. It's choosing to care about people who he knows he will outlive. It's choosing vulnerability, despite having every reason in the world to shut down. And the show gives us just enough glimpses of Skip's inner life to make this resonate without overdoing it. He has a brief romance in Skips in the Saddle. He struggles with technology in Skips versus Technology, which is both a comedy episode and a quiet commentary on how an immortal being would relate to a world that keeps changing around him. The VHS becomes the DVD, becomes the Blu-ray, becomes the stream, and Skips is still there, trying to keep up with a world that moves faster than he does. His immortality is a gift and a curse, and the show understands both sides of that equation. Let me connect Skips to another deep iceberg observation. The park, in a very real sense, is Skip's life's work. He's been there longer than anyone else. He's the institutional memory of the place. He knows where everything is, how everything works, why everything matters. And when the park is launched into space in the Season 7 finale, Skips doesn't panic. He adapts, because he's adapted before. He's seen the world change 1,000 times. The park going to space is just the latest iteration of a cycle he's been through for centuries. The calm that Mark Hamill brings to the performance is doing double duty. It's the calm of a character who has seen too much to be surprised. And it's the calm of a voice actor who understands that stillness can be more powerful than volume. Now let's talk about Pops, because if Skips is the show's hidden tragedy, Pops is its hidden mythology. On the surface, Pops Maillard is the silly, childlike man who lives in the park house and says things like, "good show" and "jolly good." He's sweet. He's naive. He seems like comic relief. He's the son of Mr. Maillard, the park's owner, who was voiced by David Ogden Stiers, best known as Major Winchester from MASH. Stiers passed away in March of 2018, about a year after the show ended, which adds a quiet sadness to every scene with Mr. Maillard if you go back and watch them now. But here's the thing about Pops that the show doesn't fully reveal until the 8th and final season. Pops' birth name is Megacranus. He was born on a planet called Lollyland as the embodiment of pure good in the universe, and he has a twin brother, an evil twin called Malum Cranus, also known as Antipops. These two beings have been battling each other for the fate of the universe every 14 billion years, and every single time, their fight ends in a stalemate, causing the entire universe to reset. Over and over and over, for eternity, Antipops is voiced by Robert Englund. Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger. The man who haunted an entire generation's nightmares is voicing the final villain of Regular Show, and the casting is perfect because Anti-Pops isn't just a bad guy. He's the cosmic opposite of everything Pops represents. If Pops is joy and innocence and warmth, Anti-Pops is despair and cruelty, and the cold void of a universe that doesn't care. Mr. Maillard found Pops on Earth after one of these universal resets and adopted him, naming him Pops because of his old-looking face. So the silly lollipop man who says "jolly good show" is actually a cosmic entity of immeasurable power who has been fighting and dying and being reborn for literally billions of years. And he doesn't remember any of it. He doesn't know what he is. He's just kind. He's just genuinely, purely kind. And when the show finally forces him to confront his destiny, it is absolutely devastating. And this connects back to something Quintel created long before Regular Show existed. The Naive Man from Lollyland was a CalArts student short film that Quintel made in 2005, which aired as part of the Nicktoons Film Festival. It won both the Producer's Choice and Student Animator Awards. The short is about an ambassador from Lollyland visiting the United States for the first time and trying to pay for a meal with lollipops. That character became Pops. Lollyland became the origin planet for a cosmic cycle of universal destruction and rebirth. A silly student film about a Candyman turned into the mythological backbone of an 8-season animated series. That's the kind of long-game storytelling that honestly makes my head spin. And here's another Pops detail that sits in the deep water. Throughout the entire series, Pops is shown to be unusually powerful in certain episodes, even before his cosmic origin is revealed. He can sometimes access abilities that don't make sense for a normal person. He lifts heavy things. He survives situations that should kill him. He has moments of inexplicable strength or resilience. And if you rewatch the show, knowing that he's Megacranus, these moments aren't plot holes. They're foreshadowing. Quintel was hinting at Pops' true nature from the very beginning, through small, easily missed moments of impossible competent tense scattered across seemingly random episodes. The lollipop man who seems fragile and foolish is actually the most powerful being in the universe, and the signs were there all along if you knew where to look. There's also Mr. Maillard's relationship with Pops to consider. Mr. Maillard, voiced by David Ogden Stiers, is often cold toward Pops, dismissive, sometimes outright cruel. He gets Benson's name wrong constantly. He treats the park staff with contempt. And for most of the series, he seems like a typical wealthy, disconnected father figure. But when you learn that Mr. Maillard found Pops as a baby after a universal reset, that he adopted an alien being and raised him as his son, the dynamic becomes much more complicated. Is Mr. Maillard cold because he doesn't care? Or because he knows what Pops is? Because he knows what's coming? Because he's been trying to prepare his son for a destiny that will ultimately require him to die? The show never explicitly answers this, but the question hangs over every interaction they have. And the fact that Stiers brought such gravitas to what could have been a one-note grumpy rich guy role makes those scenes hit differently on a rewatch. Stiers understood that Mr. Maillard was carrying a secret, even if the script hadn't revealed it yet. Let me also mention something about the show's approach to Pops that I think is structurally important. Pops is the character most closely associated with the word show in the title. His catchphrase is "jolly good show." He's the one who says it at the end of the finale. And throughout the series, Pops is the character who most consistently sees the world as a performance, as something to be enjoyed and appreciated and applauded. He claps for things. He laughs at things. He takes delight in ordinary moments. And in a show called Regular Show, a show about whether ordinary life is worth celebrating, Pops is the answer. Yes. Yes, it is. Every moment is a show worth watching. Every day is a performance worth applauding. And when Pops says "jolly good show" for the final time, he's not just commenting on the TV show. He's commenting on existence itself. He's saying that life, in all its ordinary messiness, is a jolly good show. And the fact that this verdict comes from a cosmic being who has lived and died and been reborn for billions of years gives it a weight that would otherwise be missing. This isn't naive optimism. This is optimism that has seen the worst the universe has to offer and still chooses joy. That's not naivete. That's wisdom. Let me pause here because I think this is a good moment for a meta-observation. We're deep enough in the iceberg now that I want you to notice something about the structure of Regular Show itself. The show trains you not to take it seriously. It looks like a comedy. It acts like a comedy. The first few seasons are almost entirely episodic, with very little serialized storytelling. You watch an episode, laugh, move on. But underneath all that episodic comedy, Quintel was building something enormous. He was planting seeds that wouldn't bear fruit for years. Pop's mythology, Skip's immortality, Rigby's high school dropout shame, Benson's crushed dreams. All of it was there from the beginning, waiting to be revealed. And by the time the show reaches its final season, and suddenly everything is connected, and everything matters, you realize that the show was never really episodic at all. It was one long, continuous story disguised as a series of funny 11-minute episodes. And that's something I think is genuinely brilliant. Speaking of Rigby's shame, let's go there. Rigby is a high school dropout. He never got his diploma, and for most of the series, this is played for laughs or just ignored, but the show eventually confronts it head-on. Rigby was a terrible student who constantly caused problems. He played the saxophone during a state volleyball competition and distracted his school team into losing the finals. He was reckless and self-destructive and eventually just left. But then there's Don, Rigby's younger brother, introduced in Season 1, Episode 10, also simply titled Don. Don is everything Rigby isn't. He's successful. He's an accountant. He drives a Corvette. He has his own house. Everyone loves Don. He's tall, he's charming, he's competent. And Rigby resents him for it, deeply. The episode reveals the dynamic beautifully. Rigby assumes Don is mocking him by being successful, but Don actually looks up to Rigby. He styles his hair like Rigby's. He doesn't wear clothes because Rigby doesn't. Don idolizes his older brother, and Rigby can't even see it because he's so consumed by his own insecurity. It's a really sharp piece of character writing for what's ostensibly a comedy about cartoon animals. And here's where Rigby's arc goes somewhere unexpected. In Season 6 and 7, Rigby secretly goes back to high school to get his diploma. He does it because of Eileen Roberts, voiced by Minty Lewis, who started as a writer and storyboard artist on the show before being cast. Eileen is a mole who works at the coffee shop with Margaret. She develops a crush on Rigby early on, and he couldn't care less initially. But slowly, gradually, across seasons of subtle development, Rigby starts to see her. He starts to care. And when he finds out about Eileen's ambitious life plans, he feels inadequate. He doesn't think he deserves her. So he secretly enrolls in high school to get his diploma. Not for himself, for her. Because he wants to be someone who's worthy of this person who sees something in him that he can't see in himself. Rigby's Graduation Day special is the Season 7 finale. It aired June 30th, 2016, and it ends with the entire park being launched into space. Not metaphorically. The park, the building, the land, all of it, physically launched into space, which sets up the entire 8th and final season, titled Regular Show in Space. The show went from 2 guys slack off at a park to 2 guys defend the universe from cosmic evil aboard a park floating through space in the span of 7 seasons. And somehow every step of that progression felt natural. That's masterful escalation. And let me break down that transition to space a little more, because I think it's one of the boldest creative decisions in the history of animated television. Season 8 is fundamentally a different show. The park is floating through the cosmos. The gang encounters alien species. They deal with cosmic threats. And the whole thing is building toward the final confrontation between Pops and Anti-Pops, which we'll get to. But the thing that gets me is how the show maintains its identity, even in this radically different setting. The characters are still the same people. Mordecai and Rigby are still slacking off, except now they're slacking off in space. Benson is still yelling, except now he's yelling about space-related responsibilities. The dynamic is preserved even as the context changes completely. And I think that's the point. The show is demonstrating, in its final season, that the things that matter aren't the setting or the circumstances. They're the relationships. Whether you're at a park in a nameless city or on a hunk of Earth hurtling through the void of space, the people around you are what make it worth being alive. That's the thesis. That's always been the thesis. The space arc also brings Eileen more prominently into the group. She's there on the park when it launches, and she becomes a full member of the crew for the final season. Up until this point, she'd been a supporting character, someone who existed mostly in relation to Rigby and Margaret. But Season 8 gives her agency and presence in a way the earlier seasons didn't, and it retroactively justifies the slow build of her character. She wasn't underwritten in the early seasons. She was waiting in the wings, growing quietly, until the moment the story needed her to step forward. And when she does, she's ready. That's patient storytelling. I also want to talk about the relationship between the space arc and the Mordecai-Margaret CJ situation, because by Season 8, that whole love triangle has been quietly put to rest. Neither Margaret nor CJ is present in the space arc. Mordecai is single. He's focused on the mission. And there's something really mature about how the show handles this. It doesn't give Mordecai a redemption arc with either of them in space. It doesn't manufacture a dramatic reunion. It just lets the situation be what it is. Over. Mordecai messed up his relationships, and now he has to live with that and focus on what actually matters, which is saving the universe and being there for his friends. The show trusts its audience to understand that not everything gets resolved neatly, and that sometimes the most important growth happens in the spaces between relationships, in the time when you're alone, and figuring out who you are without someone else. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me circle back before we go even deeper. The baby ducks. This is one of the show's greatest running threads, and an example of how a single gag can evolve into something genuinely epic. It starts with a bunch of baby ducks in Season 2. Cute baby ducks. They imprint on Mordecai and Rigby. Adorable. Then they combine into a giant humanoid duck warrior to fight a villain. Funny. Then in Season 4, a bunch of full-grown geese. Episode 19, which aired March 25th, 2013. The park gets invaded by territorial geese, and Mordecai and Rigby call the baby ducks, now grown, for help. The result is a giant mech battle featuring the ducks versus the geese, set to The Touch by Stan Bush from the 1986 Transformers movie. This episode was nominated for an Emmy. A bunch of ducks fighting a bunch of geese in a giant robot battle was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award. And then the trilogy concludes with Brilliant Century Duck Crisis Special in Season 6, a full half-hour special where the ducks and geese end up fighting corporate lawyers over merchandising rights. And it turns into a space battle on the moon that's a direct homage to anime and tokusatsu shows. The fact that this is a coherent sentence I just said about a Cartoon Network show tells you everything about what kind of program this was. Here's something that'll stick with you. In The Real Thomas, the revelation about Thomas being a spy, one of the earliest hints was hidden in the Season 4 premiere, Exit 9B. Thomas is the one who saves the day in that episode by signing a document that sends all the villains back. At the time, it seemed like a throwaway moment. The boring intern saves the day. Haha, ironic. But if Thomas was always a spy, if he was always operating with a hidden agenda, then his actions in Exit 9B take on a completely different meaning. He wasn't saving the park out of loyalty. He was protecting his cover, his mission. The park needed to exist for him to complete his spy operation. Regular Show planted that seed 2 full seasons before the payoff. That's not something you do by accident. Alright, we're going deep now. Really deep. This is the territory where the show starts getting dark, where the fan theories live, where the connections to Quintel's earlier work become impossible to ignore. 2 in the AM PM. This is where Regular Show actually comes from, not conceptually, literally. 2 in the AM PM is a student film J.G. Quintel made at the California Institute of the Arts, probably around 2005 or 2006. It's an animated short about 2 gas station clerks working the night shift on Halloween. The characters are voiced by and look like Quintel and Sam Marin. One of them offers the other a piece of candy that turns out to be laced with acid, and then they start hallucinating. During their trip, they hallucinate characters that would become Mordecai, Benson, and Pops, the Blue Jay, the Gumball Machine, the Lollipop Man. These aren't character designs that Quintel happened to reuse. They are literally hallucinations experienced during an acid trip. That's the origin. That is where these characters come from. 2 guys doing drugs at a gas station at 2 in the morning, and the things they see while they're tripping become the cast of a Cartoon Network show watched by millions of children. Now, Quintel has never officially said Regular Show is about drugs, and the show itself doesn't explicitly reference drug use, at least not in ways that Cartoon Network would air. But the subtext is thick enough to cut with a knife. The constant escalation from mundane to surreal. The way reality warps around simple activities. The show's obsession with snack food and procrastination and altered states of consciousness. There's even a drink in the show called the Mississippi Queen that sends Mordecai, Rigby, and Benson into what looks exactly like an intense psychedelic trip. Clocks in the background sometimes show 4:20. The show has Pink Floyd posters in certain shots. One episode references The Big Lebowski. These aren't accidents. These are breadcrumbs left by a creator who knew exactly what he was doing and who knew that a certain percentage of his audience would understand exactly what he was really saying. And I want to be clear here. I don't think this diminishes the show. If anything, it adds a layer of depth that makes the whole thing richer. And I want to dig into the drug subtext a bit more specifically, because it's more pervasive than most people realize. The Unicorns Have Got to Go episode from season 1 has Mordecai using a cologne called Dude Time to try to impress Margaret. The cologne attracts unicorns, party-obsessed creatures who trash the house and are generally terrible. The unicorns are basically frat bro party animals. They do gross stuff. They disrespect everyone. They're chaos incarnate. And the reading isn't subtle. Mordecai tried to use a shortcut, a substance, to get what he wanted, and it attracted the worst possible elements into his life. The unicorns are what happens when you take the easy way, and the only way to get rid of them is to stop using the thing that attracted them. That's literally a recovery narrative if you choose to read it that way. Then there's More Smarter from season 2. Mordecai and Rigby drink a substance that makes them smarter, and it keeps escalating until they're essentially super intelligent beings having a cosmic argument. It was banned from airing in the Asia-Pacific region because of drug and alcohol references. Banned. And the thing is, the metaphor here is about performance-enhancing substances, about the desire to be smarter, better, more capable than you naturally are, about how that desire, when pursued through artificial means, leads to increasingly detached and destructive behavior. The smarter they get, the less human they become, and it's only when they return to their regular selves that they can actually function. The episode is literally about the danger of trying to chemically transcend your natural state, and it aired on Cartoon Network for children. Brain Eraser is another one that was refused by Cartoon Network Asia Pacific due to its sexual references. And listen, I'm not going to catalog every adult joke the show ever made, because we'd be here until sunrise. But I do want to note that the show was intentionally operating in the space between what children's television was allowed to be and what adult animation typically was. It existed in a gray area, and it exploited that gray area brilliantly. The show's creators knew that standards and practices would catch the obvious stuff, so they embedded their more mature content in layers of metaphor and visual gags that could be read innocently by younger viewers and understood completely differently by older ones. That dual-layer approach is one of the show's defining characteristics, and it's a huge part of why it still holds up for adults rewatching it years later. There's always something you missed. There's always a joke you didn't get the first time. The idea that two slacker dudes working a nothing job might be experiencing reality in a fundamentally altered way, that the fantastical things that happen to them might be metaphors for the way boredom and substances and friendship can make ordinary life feel extraordinary. There's something almost philosophical about that reading, almost beautiful. But let me push even deeper, because there's another CalArts connection that goes beyond just Quintel. The CalArts animation program in the mid-2000s was essentially a factory for the next generation of cartoon showrunners. J.G. Quintel was there. Pendleton Ward, who created Adventure Time, was there. They were classmates. They were friends. They pushed each other creatively, trying to out-funny each other according to Ward himself. Alex Hirsch, who would go on to create Gravity Falls, was part of the same extended creative network. These people all knew each other, all influenced each other, and all went on to create the shows that defined the Cartoon Network renaissance. There's a ritual they had at CalArts where about 20 students, including Quintel and Marin, would throw title names into a hat, draw them out at midnight, read them aloud, and then race back to their desks to make a short film in 48 hours based on whatever word they drew. That chaotic improvisational energy, that willingness to commit fully to a random idea and see where it goes, that's literally the DNA of Regular Show. Every episode is basically, what if we took this one mundane situation and committed to it so hard that it becomes cosmic? The same creative philosophy that produced student films at CalArts produced 244 episodes of television. Now, here's a deep-tier fact that connects to the show's hidden continuity. In the three-part finale, characters named Frivola Kranus, Quadravi Kranus, and Weird Mushroom Guy are all earlier drawings of Pops. They're literally previous versions of the character design, pulled from Quintel's development sketches, and incorporated into the show as in-universe entities. The show is acknowledging its own creative process within its own fiction. The drafts that led to Pops became actual characters in the story. That's a level of meta-textual self-reference that you almost never see in animation, and most viewers watch the finale without ever realizing it. It's an Easter egg for the deepest possible fans, the ones who've seen Quintel's early sketches and recognize the character designs. And the fact that these earlier versions of Pops exist as cosmic entities in the world of the show suggests something profound about the nature of creation. Every draft, every rejected idea, every abandoned concept still exists in some form. Nothing is truly lost. Even the paths not taken leave their mark on the final work. And speaking of hidden visual details, remember how I mentioned that High Five Ghost is the only character with a shadow? There's a debate in the fan community about whether this is intentional or a production oversight. On one hand, it could be a visual gag about a ghost being more corporeal than the living characters. On the other hand, it could just be an artifact of the animation process that nobody caught. The fact that this debate exists, that fans have analyzed the shadow placement frame by frame across multiple episodes, tells you something about the depth of engagement this show inspires. People don't just watch Regular Show. They study it. They parse it. They treat it with the same analytical rigor that film scholars apply to Kubrick or Hitchcock. And I think the show deserves that level of attention, because the more closely you look, the more you find. Let me also talk about something that sits in this mid to deep range of the iceberg, the Flapjack connection. Before Regular Show, J.G. Quintel worked on The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack as a creative director. So did Pendleton Ward, who created Adventure Time. So did Alex Hirsch. Flapjack was essentially the training ground for an entire generation of showrunners. It was a weird, experimental show with a specific grotesque art style, and it gave these young creators room to experiment in ways that more established shows wouldn't have. When you watch the transition from Flapjack to Regular Show and Adventure Time and Gravity Falls, you can see how that creative incubation period shaped everything that came after. The willingness to be strange, to commit to a bit, to mix genuine emotion with surreal comedy, all of that was honed on Flapjack. The Cartoon Network Renaissance didn't emerge from nothing. It emerged from a specific creative ecosystem, and Flapjack was the petri dish. And here's something else that lives in the deeper waters. The My Mom episode from Season 2. Not the recurring joke. There's an actual episode titled My Mom, Season 2, Episode 6. Benson forces Mordecai and Rigby to work with Muscle Man, and the episode becomes this escalating confrontation about the My Mom jokes. Muscle Man's brother shows up, and they make Mordecai and Rigby look at a photo of their actual mother and say she's beautiful. Then they grill the photo and make them eat it. It's gross and uncomfortable, and it's also, in a weird way, a story about boundaries and respect. The My Mom jokes aren't just a running gag. They're Muscle Man's armor, his way of deflecting. And when the episode forces a direct confrontation with the actual person behind the jokes, it gets uncomfortable fast. That discomfort is the point. Let's talk about the Christmas special. Season 4, Episode 9. This is a half-hour special where an evil elf named Quilgan, voiced by Thomas Hayden Church, steals a mysterious gift box from Santa's workshop. The box can give whoever opens it anything they want, but it's powered by dark magic and brings out the worst in everyone who tries to possess it. Quilgan wants to use it to destroy Christmas forever. Santa enlists Mordecai and Rigby to destroy the box before Quilgan can use it. And in the climax, Mordecai falls into a lava pit while fighting Quilgan, and Rigby immediately jumps in after him. No hesitation. His best friend is falling into lava, so he follows. That moment tells you everything about Rigby that matters. He's lazy, he's immature, he's selfish in 100 small ways. But when it counts, when it really truly counts, he will throw himself into fire for the people he loves. And that's who he is underneath all the rest of it. Okay, I need to talk about the Regular Show movie, because it's surprisingly important to understanding the deeper lore, and it doesn't get enough attention. Regular Show the movie was released in 2015. It's a time travel story. In the distant future, the park crew is fighting a villain called Lord Ross, who is Mordecai and Rigby's former science teacher and volleyball coach. He wants to erase the timeline. And here's the kicker. In this future timeline, Mordecai has been turned into a cybernetic soldier who is estranged from Rigby. Why? Because of something that happened when they were in high school. The movie reveals that in high school, Mordecai and Rigby built a time machine that malfunctioned and created a time tornado that was later weaponized. And Rigby did something unforgivable. He sabotaged Mordecai's college acceptance letter. Mordecai was accepted into art school, his dream school. And Rigby, terrified of being left behind, destroyed the letter so Mordecai would never know. That's why they both ended up working at the park. Not because they were slackers, because Rigby sabotaged his best friend's future out of fear and selfishness. And Mordecai never knew. When this comes out in the movie, Mordecai is furious, rightfully so. And the movie has to deal with the question of whether a friendship can survive a betrayal that fundamental. Whether you can forgive someone who literally stole your future from you. And the answer the movie gives is complicated. It doesn't say the betrayal was okay. It doesn't wave it away. But it suggests that the friendship they built at the park, the experiences they shared, the people they became together, that all of that has value, even if the foundation was built on a lie. It's a deeply mature take on friendship and forgiveness that I don't think the movie got enough credit for. And while we're on the movie, let me connect it back to something I mentioned earlier. Rigby sabotaged Mordecai's college acceptance letter, which means Mordecai was supposed to go to art school. He was supposed to be an artist. And what does he become in the 25-year epilogue? An artist. He marries a woman he meets at an art gallery. He eventually gets to the destination Rigby detoured him from, just by a different, much longer route. The park wasn't a dead end for Mordecai. It was a detour. And the detour gave him everything that mattered. His friendships, his experiences, his growth. Without the park, without Rigby's betrayal, without all those years of slacking off and fighting monsters, Mordecai might have gotten to art school earlier, but he wouldn't have been the same person when he got there. The movie, intentionally or not, suggests that the worst thing that ever happened to Mordecai, his friend stealing his future, was also the thing that ultimately shaped him into someone who could have a real life. Let me also connect the movie to something we talked about earlier. The time tornado, the time machine that Mordecai and Rigby built in high school. Think about what that means in context. These are two teenagers who built a working time machine for a science project. They're not stupid. Rigby might be a dropout, and Mordecai might have ended up at the park. But when they actually apply themselves, they're capable of building technology that shouldn't exist. And the movie treats this as a throwaway detail, almost. Like, of course they built a time machine. They're Mordecai and Rigby. Weird things happen around them. But it raises a question that the show never directly answers. Are Mordecai and Rigby special? Is there something about them specifically that attracts the supernatural? They're groundskeepers, but impossible things keep happening to them. Is that coincidence? The show suggests not. The movie suggests that they've been connected to extraordinary events since before the park, since high school. And the finale suggests that they're connected to Pop's cosmic cycle, that their friendship is somehow tied to the fate of the universe itself. Are Mordecai and Rigby cosmic agents? Pieces on a board they don't know they're playing on? The show never says so explicitly, but the evidence accumulates across 8 seasons in a way that's hard to ignore. That's a wildly complex thing to put in a Cartoon Network movie. The idea that betrayal and forgiveness and lost time can all coexist, that you can be angry about what was taken from you and grateful for what replaced it. That's not just a mature theme for animation. That's a mature theme for any medium. Quintel was working at a level of emotional sophistication that I think gets lost in the conversation about Regular Show, because people see the animation style and the Cartoon Network branding and assume it's simple. It's not simple. It's deceptively complex. The simplicity is the disguise. Personal tangent number 3.5 here. I actually think about the college letter thing a lot in my own life. The idea that the path you're on might not be the path you were supposed to be on, and that might be okay. That the detour might be the actual destination. I think a lot of people watching this are in their own version of the park right now, working a job that doesn't match their dreams, living a life that doesn't look like the one they planned. And Regular Show says, that's not a failure. That's just a different route. The things that matter, the friendships, the growth, the moments of unexpected beauty, those aren't reserved for the people who followed the straight path. They happen on the detour too, maybe especially on the detour. Look, I know I keep saying for a cartoon or for a kid's show and then describing something really emotionally complex. And I need to stop doing that actually, because the implication that animation can't be emotionally complex is exactly the kind of thinking that Regular Show was actively fighting against. Quintel made a show that looked like a goofy comedy about cartoon animals, and then filled it with genuinely profound things to say about friendship, loss, growing up, failing, and trying again. And the fact that it was animated and aired on Cartoon Network didn't diminish any of that. If anything, the format allowed it to be more emotionally daring than most live-action shows, because the surreal elements gave the writers permission to be metaphorical in ways that realism doesn't allow. Alright, we're approaching the bottom now. The abyss. The darkest, most obscure territory. The stuff that'll have you staring at your ceiling at 4 a.m. Let's talk about what Pops' sacrifice actually means. In the series finale, a regular epic final battle, which aired January 16th, 2017, Pops has to fight Anti-Pops to save the universe. Every time they've fought before, across billions of years, the result has been a stalemate that resets everything. But this time, Pops does something different. Instead of fighting, he hugs Anti-Pops. He embraces his twin brother with genuine love, and it neutralizes Anti-Pops' negative energy. And then Pops grabs Anti-Pops and hurls both of them into a star, killing them both and breaking the cycle forever. Pops sacrifices himself to save the universe. The kindest, most innocent character on the show chooses to die so that everyone else can live. And the way the finale handles this is extraordinary. Before the final battle, characters from across the entire series show up to help. Every ally, every friend, every character who was ever helped by the park crew. They all come back, forming a giant robot that assists Pops in the fight. It's fan service, sure, but it's earned fan service. These are relationships that were built over 8 seasons, and seeing them all come together one last time carries genuine emotional weight. And then, the epilogue, 25 years later. The park crew reunites for a gathering at a statue of Pops. They're all older. They've all moved on. And here's where Mordecai's ending gets wild. Mordecai doesn't end up with Margaret. He doesn't end up with CJ. He becomes a successful artist and marries a character we've never met before, a Batwoman named Steph, who he meets at an art gallery. They have 3 children who are Blue Jay and Bat hybrids. It's a choice that infuriated a lot of fans, because it felt like the whole Margaret and CJ arc was rendered pointless. But I think it's actually one of the most honest things the show ever did. Sometimes the person you end up with isn't someone from your past. Sometimes it's someone you haven't met yet. Sometimes the great love of your life isn't the one you spent years pining for, or the one you dated in your mid-20s. Sometimes it's someone who shows up later, someone you meet when you've finally figured out who you are and what you want. Mordecai had to go through Margaret and CJ and all that pain and confusion to become the person who could meet Steph and actually be ready for a real partnership. That's not a cop-out. That's life. Rigby and Eileen got married. They have 2 daughters. They're happy. High Five Ghost married his girlfriend Celia, who he met at a cafe and reconnected with after she returned from studying in Prague. They become famous DJs and have a son. Muscle Man and Starla are still together with their daughter. Benson is still managing the park, but seems more at peace. And Skips is still at the park. Still immortal. Still skipping. Everyone else got to grow old and move on, but Skips will be there forever, watching his friends age and die while he remains the same. And the show doesn't dwell on how sad that is. It just shows him there, at the reunion, skipping, and lets you feel it. The finale ends with a cassette tape labeled Regular Show, ejecting from a tape player, and we hear Pop's voice one last time saying, "Jolly good show," expressing happiness that his friends are moving on with their lives. It's a fourth wall break that acknowledges the audience. The show is over. The tape has ended. And that's okay. It was a good show. Here's the thing about the tape. The entire series is framed as something being played on a tape. Regular show. Not a regular show. The regular show. It's a recording. A document of something that happened. And Pops' final words suggest that he's been watching. That from wherever he is, after sacrificing himself, he can see his friends living their lives. And he's happy. The cosmic entity of pure good, who died to save the universe, is still watching over the people he loved. And his final judgment is simple. It was a jolly good show. I mean, come on. If that doesn't get you, I don't know what will. Now, even deeper. The philosophical underpinning that most people miss entirely. Regular Show is, at its core, a show about the tension between the mundane and the extraordinary. Every episode starts with something boring. Clean the gutters. Set up the chairs. Mow the lawn. And every episode ends with something insane. Fight a demon. Escape the underworld. Save the timeline. And the show's thesis, the thing it's actually arguing across 244 episodes, is that these two things aren't opposites. The mundane and the extraordinary are the same thing. The relationships you build while doing boring work are the same relationships that save the universe. The skills you learn while slacking off are the same skills that defeat cosmic evil. Regular Show is saying that there's no such thing as an ordinary life. That every life, even the life of a groundskeeper at a park, is extraordinary if you look at it from the right angle. If you zoom out far enough, everyone is on an epic adventure. We just don't notice because we're too busy worrying about cleaning the gutters. And honestly, that's a deeply comforting philosophy. Especially if you're lying in bed right now at 2 a.m, wondering whether your life means anything. Regular Show says yes. Not despite the boring parts, but because of them. Okay, let me take you into the truly obscure territory now. The stuff that even dedicated fans might not know. The censorship history of Regular Show is a rabbit hole all on its own. Different countries censored different things for wildly different reasons. In the United States, early episodes had mild profanity that was gradually softened in reruns. The Power originally had characters saying pissed. Meet Your Maker had similar language. By 2012, all of that was being redubbed. In the UK, the censorship was much more extensive. Death references were altered, innuendo was cut, and in one particularly absurd case, the episode Guitar of Rock had a newscaster announcing that a character had died, which was changed for UK broadcast to say the character had stopped being alive. Stopped being alive. That's what they went with instead of died. Because apparently the concept of death is too much, but stopping being alive is somehow better. In Australia, several episodes were outright banned before eventually airing in censored forms. Horror episodes were pulled for being too scary. The Unicorns Have Got to Go was banned in Poland, Romania, and Hungary, probably because of the gross-out humor, but nobody has ever gotten a definitive answer as to why. And in the Asia-Pacific region, Cartoon Network refused to air Brain Eraser due to sexual references and seizure risk, and More Smarter was pulled for drug and alcohol references. The fact that a show about cartoon animals at a park had episodes banned across the globe for drug references, horror content, and geopolitical sensitivity is kind of remarkable when you think about it. And speaking of things you might not know, did you know that Minty Lewis, who voices Eileen, was originally a writer and storyboard artist on the show? She wasn't cast as a voice actress. She was behind the scenes, working on scripts and boards, and when she wrote Eileen's dialogue about baby sea turtle eggs in Do Me a Solid and pitched it in the writing room, the team realized her voice was perfect for the character. So Eileen's voice actress is actually one of the show's creative architects. That's the kind of detail that makes you appreciate the show on a completely different level. Here's something else. High Five Ghost is the only Regular Show character who has a shadow. Every other character, no shadow. But High Five Ghost, the ghost, the literal transparent ghost, has one. It's a tiny visual detail that you'd never notice unless someone pointed it out. And once you know, it becomes one of those things you can't unsee. And then there's the deeper fan theory territory. The most persistent theory about Regular Show is the acid trip theory. The idea that the entire show takes place inside a hallucination. That Mordecai and Rigby are actually the two gas station clerks from 2 in the AM PM who took acid and never came down. Every monster, every supernatural event, every escalation. It's all the trip. The park isn't real. The characters aren't real. 2 guys ate acid candy at a gas station on Halloween night, and everything we've been watching for 8 seasons is what they're seeing. Now, I don't think this theory is correct. Quintel has never endorsed it, and I think taking it literally removes the emotional stakes from the show. If nothing is real, then Pops' sacrifice doesn't matter. Mordecai and Rigby's friendship doesn't matter. None of it matters. And that contradicts everything the show is about. But I do think the theory speaks to something true about the show's relationship with altered perception. Regular Show exists in a space where reality is malleable, where the rules of the everyday world can be broken at any moment, and where the ordinary becomes extraordinary through a shift in perspective. That's not an acid trip. That's what art does. Regular Show is literally doing what all great art does, making you see the familiar in a completely new way. The acid trip theory is a literalization of something the show is doing metaphorically. There's also a theory that connects Regular Show to a specific genre of philosophy, existentialism. Mordecai and Rigby are, in a very real sense, existentialist heroes. They live in a world where the normal rules of reality don't apply, where the absurd is literally real, where setting up chairs for a birthday party can lead to a fight with interdimensional beings. And they respond to this absurdity, not with despair or paralysis, but with a kind of cheerful resilience. They keep going. They keep showing up to work. They keep dealing with whatever insane thing happens this week, and then going back to normal. That's basically the philosophy of Albert Camus applied to a Cartoon Network show. The absurd hero, the person who recognizes the meaninglessness of existence and chooses to engage with it anyway, that's Mordecai and Rigby. They've seen the void. They've fought the void. And then they went home and played video games. And there's something deeply reassuring about that. There's another fan theory that I find genuinely unsettling, and I think it belongs at the bottom of this iceberg. The theory that each supernatural entity the gang encounters represents a real danger from their mundane lives, amplified through the show's surreal lens. The tape-obsessed villain represents addiction to media. The horde of zombies represents the mindless conformity of consumer culture. The sentient, malicious technology represents the dehumanizing effects of the digital age. Under this reading, every monster of the week isn't random. It's a metaphor. And the show's formula, mundane problem leads to supernatural crisis, isn't just a comedy structure. It's a philosophical framework. Regular Show is saying that the mundane problems of everyday life are monstrous. That the pressures of work and relationships and identity are, when you really look at them, as terrifying and as dangerous as any demon or interdimensional entity. The supernatural escalation doesn't exaggerate the problem. It accurately represents how the problem feels. When you're 23 and your boss is screaming at you and you don't know what you're doing with your life, it feels like the world is ending. It feels like monsters are chasing you. Regular Show just shows you what that feeling actually looks like. Another theory that floats around the deep end of the iceberg is the idea that the park is a form of purgatory or limbo. The characters are all trapped in a cycle of repetition. The same basic structure happens every episode. Nothing permanently changes. No one ages. No one moves forward. They're stuck. And the only way out is through genuine growth and self-realization, which is exactly what the characters achieve by the finale. Mordecai becomes an artist. Rigby gets his diploma and marries Eileen. Muscle Man starts a family. They escape the cycle by becoming better versions of themselves. And Pops, the cosmic being at the center of the cycle, literally breaks it by choosing love over conflict. In this reading, The whole series is a metaphor for personal growth, with the park representing the comfortable stagnation of early adulthood, and the finale representing the moment you finally let go and move on. I find this theory more compelling than the acid trip one, honestly, because it doesn't negate the emotional truth of the show. If anything, it deepens it. We're all stuck in loops. We all have our own parks. And the only way out is to do the hard work of growing up. And okay, here's something that's genuinely at the bottom of the abyss. Let me tell you about the censorship rabbit hole. Because the deeper you go into Regular Show's censorship history, the weirder it gets. We already talked about how the US versions had mild profanity scrubbed from reruns. But the international censorship is where things get truly bizarre. In the UK, the show was systematically altered to remove almost any reference to death. A character who dies on screen in the US version stops being alive in the UK version. That specific phrase, stops being alive, as if the concept is somehow less disturbing if you rephrase it. The UK censors also removed innuendo, redubbed certain lines, and in some cases reanimated scenes to remove content they deemed inappropriate. They literally reanimated scenes. They drew new animation to replace the parts they didn't like. That's an extraordinary amount of effort to alter a children's cartoon, and it tells you something about how different cultures draw the line between appropriate and inappropriate content for kids. In Australia, the censorship was even more aggressive. Multiple episodes were outright banned before eventually being released in censored versions. Episodes with horror elements were pulled because they could upset younger kids. Bullying references got episodes banned, and the specifics of what got cut varied from episode to episode, suggesting that the Australian censors were making judgment calls on a case-by-case basis rather than applying a consistent standard. That inconsistency is itself interesting, because it suggests that nobody really knew what to do with Regular Show. The show existed in a space that traditional content guidelines weren't designed for. It wasn't violent enough to be restricted, but it wasn't gentle enough to be unrestricted. It lived in a gray area that different countries drew different lines around. And then there's Russia, where the real Thomas was banned because the portrayal of Thomas as a Russian spy was considered offensive, which is one of those cases where reality and fiction collide in uncomfortable ways. The episode was written and aired before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but it became increasingly controversial as geopolitical tensions escalated. A silly cartoon episode about a spy in a pizza costume became a geopolitical flashpoint. That's the kind of thing that happens when a show operates at the intersection of comedy and real-world commentary, even when the commentary is unintentional. Quintel wasn't trying to make a statement about Russia. He was trying to make a funny episode about a boring intern being a spy. But the real world doesn't care about authorial intent. The real world reads things through its own lens, and sometimes a funny spy episode becomes an international incident. Here's one more censorship fact that genuinely surprised me. In one episode, a character's death was changed for the UK broadcast to say the character had been taken to hospital. In another, a fight scene was reanimated to show the characters pushing each other instead of hitting each other. And in multiple episodes, the word kill was replaced with destroy or get rid of, as if the semantic distinction between those words makes any meaningful difference to a child watching a cartoon. The censorship history of Regular Show is its own iceberg, honestly. There are layers and layers of changes that vary by country, by episode, by broadcast date, and by the specific censor who happened to be reviewing the content that week. And mapping all those changes would take longer than this entire video. Personal tangent number 3. I think about the park a lot, as a metaphor, I mean. The idea of a place where you're comfortable but not growing, where you have friends and routines and familiar rhythms, but nothing ever really changes. I think everyone has a park in their life. A job you've stayed at too long, a relationship you've outgrown, a version of yourself you keep performing because it's easier than becoming someone new. Regular Show looked at that park and said, you can love this place and still leave it. You can be grateful for what it gave you and still move on. And that's not betrayal. That's just growing up. All right, let's go to the absolute bottom, the deepest, darkest level of the iceberg. Regular Show, The Lost Tapes. On June 12th, 2024, at the Annecy Animation Film Festival, Cartoon Network announced a revival series with J.G. Quintel returning as showrunner. Regular Show, The Lost Tapes, is set to premiere on May 11th, 2026, on Cartoon Network, with 44 episodes planned. The original cast is returning, with Mark Hamill reprising Skips. The series isn't a reboot, and it isn't a sequel. It's framed as lost episodes, stories that happened during the original run that we never saw, which means the show's timeline isn't being altered. The finale still stands. Pops is still gone. The characters still grew up. These are just stories we missed. And I think that's brilliant, because it means you can watch The Lost Tapes and enjoy new Regular Show content without worrying about whether it will undermine the original ending. The ending is intact. The farewell was real. These are just bonus moments, little pieces of time that slipped through the cracks, like finding a mixtape you forgot you made. But the very existence of the revival raises an interesting philosophical question about the show's own mythology. If the series is a tape, a cassette labeled Regular Show that ejects at the end of the finale, then The Lost Tapes is literally more tape. More recording that was always there but was never played. The framing device of the original show, the idea that everything we watched was a recording on a cassette, is being used to justify the continuation of the series within its own fictional framework. That's clever meta-storytelling. Now here's where I want to go to a place that's genuinely unsettling. Let me tell you about the death toll of Regular Show. I mean, the literal death toll. Characters die in this show. A lot. Skips kills Rigby in Over the Top and has to win him back from death. Characters die in the terror tales of the Park Anthology specials every season. The finale kills Pops. But here's the thing people don't talk about. Regular Show has some of the highest on-screen death counts of any Cartoon Network show ever. Villains explode, get consumed by portals, are destroyed permanently. Garrett Bobby Ferguson literally explodes. His son is dragged back to the underworld. In the Season 8 space arc, the stakes are existential and characters face real, permanent consequences. The show gets away with this because of its tone. The humor acts as a buffer. You're laughing at something, and then suddenly someone dies. And the show moves on so quickly that your brain doesn't fully process what just happened until later. It's a technique that horror movies use. The jump scare and the joke serve the same function. They override your rational processing with an emotional reaction. Regular Show uses comedy to do what horror does, which is to slip genuine darkness past your defenses without you realizing it. And speaking of darkness, let me talk about something that lives at this depth of the iceberg. The show's recurring villains aren't just obstacles, they're reflections. Garrett Bobby Ferguson is a mirror of what Mordecai and Rigby could become if they let their obsessions consume them. A man who devoted his entire life to a game and lost everything else. His wife left him. He has nothing. And when he loses his record, he literally explodes. That's not just a funny visual gag. That's a portrait of a person whose identity was so completely fused with one achievement that the loss of it destroyed them. And the show puts that portrait directly in front of Mordecai and Rigby, two characters who are absolutely in danger of becoming that person, and says, look, this is where obsession leads. This is the end game of caring about nothing but the score. GBF's son, Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr., takes this even further. He builds his entire identity around avenging his father, opening the portal in Exit 9B to summon every villain the park crew has ever defeated. His motivations aren't even his own. He's living in his father's shadow, defined entirely by someone else's grudge. And the park crew defeats him, not through strength or cleverness, but through a technicality. Thomas signs a document. Bureaucracy wins, which is, in its own weird way, one of the most subversive villain defeats in animation. The epic portal of doom is closed by paperwork. And let's talk about the terror tales of the park specials. Every season from season 3 onward, the show did a half-hour Halloween special where the characters tell each other scary stories. 6 specials total across the run of the show. And some of these stories are genuinely disturbing. They go places that regular episodes can't go, because the anthology format gives them permission to experiment with tone. People die. Bodies are transformed. There's real horror in there. Not jump scare horror, but but the kind of creeping existential horror that stays with you. A character becomes a doll. A character is trapped in a nightmare loop. A character's identity is erased. These specials are where the show's darkest instincts live, and they're often overlooked because they're framed as spooky fun. The first Terror Tales in Season 3 sets the template. The park gang is driving to a Halloween party and telling scary stories to pass the time. Each story is told by a different character, and the framing device is that the best story wins. What's clever about this format is that it lets the show do things it normally can't. In the regular episodes, the supernatural elements always reset by the end, but in the Terror Tales, characters can die permanently, can be transformed forever, can face consequences that don't get undone. The anthology format creates a space where the stakes are genuinely high, because these stories exist outside the main continuity. They're not bound by the rules. And the framing devices for the Terror Tales get increasingly creative as the series goes on. In one year, they're trapped in a haunted house. In another, they're in a horror-themed amusement park. The show uses these specials to push its visual style too. The animation gets more extreme, more stylized, more willing to go to places that would be jarring in a regular episode. There are moments in the Terror Tales that are genuinely scary, not in a cheap way, but in a way that taps into real fears. The fear of losing your identity, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of your body changing in ways you can't control. These are childhood fears dressed up in cartoon horror, and they land harder because of it. And here's a deep-cut fact about the Terror Tales. The final one, Terror Tales of the Park 6, takes place during the space arc of Season 8. So the tradition continues, even when the show has fundamentally changed its setting. The gang is in space, and they're still telling scary stories, because that's what you do when you're scared. You tell stories about being scared. You externalize the fear. You share it with the people you trust, and in doing so, you make it manageable. The Terror Tales aren't just Halloween specials. They're a coping mechanism. The characters are processing their fears through narrative, which is, when you think about it, exactly what art does, what storytelling does, what this video is doing right now, in a way. Here's another deep cut. J.G. Quintel's show, Close Enough. After Regular Show ended in 2017, Quintel created Close Enough for what was then HBO Max. It premiered on July 9th, 2020. The show was basically Regular Show aged up. Instead of 20-something slackers at a park, it was 30-something parents in a duplex dealing with the chaos of adult life. Same surreal escalation, same pop culture references, same energy, but with mortgages and daycare and the specific anxieties of being in your 30s. It ran for 3 seasons before HBO Max canceled it in 2022. And then, in what I think is one of the most frustrating decisions in recent animation history, removed it from the platform entirely. Close Enough is relevant to the iceberg because it shows you where Quintel's creative instincts naturally go when he's freed from the constraints of a children's network. The humor is raunchier. The themes are more explicitly adult, and you can see the through line from 2 in the AM PM to Regular Show to Close Enough. It's all the same vision at different ages. 2 guys tripping at a gas station. 2 guys slacking at a park. 2 guys raising kids in a duplex. The chaos is the same. The format is the same. But the perspective shifts as the creator ages, and the concerns of the characters age with him. It's a longitudinal study of one artist's creative philosophy, and it's genuinely fascinating to map. And the cancellation of Close Enough, and its removal from HBO Max is, I think, one of the great tragedies of modern animation. Here was a show that had a perfect critical reception, a dedicated fan base, and a creator with a proven track record. And it was killed by corporate restructuring and platform reshuffling. The show was originally supposed to air on TBS in 2017, got delayed repeatedly, finally found a home on HBO Max in 2020, thrived for 3 seasons, and then was canceled and literally removed from existence when the platform started purging content. You can't legally stream it anymore. It's gone. And for a show that was supposed to be the natural evolution of Regular Show's creative DNA, that erasure feels particularly cruel. It's like burning the next chapter of a story that millions of people were invested in. But here's what's interesting. The existence of Close Enough and its subsequent removal actually makes the Regular Show revival more significant. Regular Show, The Lost Tapes, isn't just a nostalgia play. It's a second chance. It's Quintel returning to the creative space that the industry still allows him to inhabit. And the fact that he's doing it on Cartoon Network, the network that gave him his first shot, feels like a homecoming. The Lost Tapes might be framed as stories we missed during the original run, but on a deeper level, they're stories that Quintel still needs to tell. Stories that the cancellation of Close Enough left untold. The medium changes, the characters change, but the creative impulse remains the same. And look, I have to acknowledge something here. The fact that we're getting a Regular Show revival in 2026 is remarkable, 9 years after the original series ended. That's how deep the show's cultural footprint goes. Kids who watched the first episode in 2010 are in their mid-20s now. They've lived through the exact same transitions the characters went through. They've left their own parks. They've dealt with their own Margarets and CGs. They've had to figure out who they are without the safety net of their 20s. And now the show is coming back to meet them where they are. That's not just entertainment. That's a relationship. A long-distance relationship that's being renewed after nearly a decade of silence. Personal tangent 4. I think about legacy a lot when it comes to shows like this. How something can air on a children's network for 7 years and then just become part of the cultural fabric. I meet people all the time who bond over Regular Show the way previous generations bonded over Seinfeld or The Simpsons. It's a shared language, a shared set of references and emotional touchstones. When someone says, "Oh," in that Mordecai and Rigby way, people recognize it instantly. When someone references "my mom" in that specific cadence, everyone knows. The show created a shorthand, a vocabulary, that an entire generation uses without even thinking about it. And that's the real measure of a show's impact. Not awards or ratings, but whether it becomes part of how people communicate with each other. Regular Show absolutely did that. And you know what? Let me talk about the "oh" for a second more, because it's emblematic of something larger. That group exclamation that the characters do when something crazy happens. It became one of the most recognizable sounds in all of animation. People who have never seen a single episode of Regular Show know the "oh." It crossed over from the show into general internet culture, into meme culture, into the vocabulary of an entire generation. And the thing about it is that it's not a joke. It's a reaction. It's the characters expressing collective astonishment at the absurdity of their own lives. It's the sound of people who have given up trying to understand what's happening and have just decided to be amazed by it. And in a weird way, that's a philosophy too. The "oh" is the show's answer to the absurdity of existence. Don't try to explain it. Don't try to control it. Just throw your hands up and go "oh" and ride the wave. It's acceptance disguised as a catchphrase. The cart is another iconic element that deserves its own mention at this point in the iceberg. That golf cart that Mordecai and Rigby drive around the park. It's been destroyed more times than I can count. It's been rebuilt, modified, weaponized, launched into space. It's practically a character in its own right, and it serves as a symbol of the character's relationship with responsibility. They're given a vehicle to do their job, and they invariably use it for everything except their job. They race it, they crash it, they take it on unauthorized adventures. The cart is freedom. It's the one piece of equipment that lets them go wherever they want. And the show understands that the appeal of a vehicle when you're young and broke isn't about transportation. It's about possibility. Where can we go? What can we do? The cart is the answer to those questions. And the fact that it keeps getting destroyed and rebuilt mirrors the character's own cycle of screwing up and starting over. I want to address one more thing at this depth before we go to the absolute bottom. The show's soundtrack. We've talked about the licensed 80s songs, but I haven't talked about the original score, and I think it deserves attention. The background music of Regular Show is this subtle blend of synthesizers and ambient textures that creates a very specific atmosphere. It's warm, but slightly eerie. Familiar, but off-kilter. It sounds like a VHS tape from 1986 playing in an empty room. And that sonic identity is so consistent across the entire run that you could hear 3 seconds of a regular show score and identify it immediately. The music does the same thing the animation does. It creates a world that feels both nostalgic and slightly wrong, like a memory that's been distorted just enough to be dreamlike. And the use of real songs goes beyond just the 80s. The show also uses music as an emotional tool in ways that most animated shows don't. When Party Tonight plays at the end of Mordecai and the Rigbys, it's not just a gag. It's a genuine emotional moment. Two friends performing together and experiencing something magical. When Benson plays the drums in This Is My Jam and 150 Piece Kit, the music isn't just plot relevant. It's cathartic. You feel the release. You feel Benson's talent and his pain and his triumph all through the rhythm. The show understood that music could carry emotional information that dialogue couldn't, and it used that understanding constantly. There's also the matter of the show's relationship with silence. Not every moment has a score. Some of the most powerful scenes in Regular Show happen in relative quiet. Mordecai sitting alone after Margaret leaves. Rigby in his hospital bed during Excellent. Pop's looking at the stars before the final battle. These moments breathe. The show gives them space, and that restraint is part of what makes the emotional beats land so hard. If every scene had wall-to-wall music, the quiet moments wouldn't exist, and the emotional punches wouldn't have room to connect. Okay, let me tell you about something that's truly at the bottom of the iceberg. Something that connects everything together in a way that I think is kind of haunting. J.G. Quintel was born on September 13th, 1982. He grew up during the exact era that Regular Show romanticizes. The 80s music, the 80s movies, the arcade games, the VHS tapes, all of that is his actual childhood. When Regular Show references these things, it's not a calculated marketing decision. It's a man recreating his own past through animation. The park is his childhood. The friendship between Mordecai and Rigby is his friendship with Sam Marin, his roommate and collaborator from CalArts. The creative chaos of the show is the creative chaos of that CalArts animation program, where they'd pull titles from a hat at midnight and race to make something in 48 hours. And here's where it gets deeper. When the show ends, when the characters grow up and move on, when the tape ejects, what Quintel is processing is the end of that era. His own childhood, his own youth, his own time at the park, metaphorically speaking. The finale isn't just the end of a TV show. It's a meditation on what it means to let go of the things that made you who you are. The park was where Mordecai and Rigby became themselves. CalArts was where Quintel became himself. And both of those places exist now, only as memories, as tapes, as recordings of something that happened once and can never happen again. Here's something else about Quintel that I think is important for understanding the show at its deepest level. He didn't just create Regular Show as a product. He created it as a way of processing his own experience. The show's themes of friendship and creative collaboration and the fear of losing what you've built. Those aren't abstract concerns for him. They're personal. He built Regular Show with his closest friends. Sam Marin, his CalArts roommate, voices 3 of the main characters. The show's creative team was full of people he'd known since college. And when the show ended, that creative family dispersed. People moved on to other projects. The daily collaboration, the shared creative space, the inside jokes and shared references, all of that went away. And I think the finale, with its 25-year time skip and its emphasis on the characters moving on with separate lives, is Quintel processing that loss in real time. He's not just writing about cartoon characters growing apart. He's writing about his own creative team growing apart, about the end of something that defined his life for 7 years. And that's why the finale hits so hard, even if you don't know any of this context. Because the emotions are authentic. They come from a real place. Quintel didn't have to imagine what it feels like to say goodbye to the people you built something with. He was living it. And that authenticity bleeds through every frame of a regular epic final battle. You can feel the weight of it. You can feel that this isn't just a story ending. It's a chapter of someone's life closing. When Pop says jolly good show, he's not just talking about the TV show Regular Show. He's talking about youth itself. About the whole messy, chaotic, beautiful experience of being young and stupid and creative and alive. And his verdict is gentle. It was good. Not perfect. Not always pretty, but good. Jolly good. Let me also bring up something about the finale's structure that blew my mind when someone pointed it out to me. A regular epic final battle aired on January 16th, 2017, consisting of episodes 259 through 261 overall. Each part is 11 minutes long, maintaining the show's format even in its most epic moment. The show doesn't suddenly become a different kind of show for its finale. It stays true to its format. 3 11-minute episodes. Same length as any other regular show episode. Same runtime, same structure. The most important story the show ever told was told in the same amount of time as the episode where Rigby's body walks away from him. And that's a statement. It's saying that every story the show has told has been equally important. That Rigby's body and a regular epic final battle occupy the same space, demand the same attention, deserve the same care. There are no filler episodes. There are no throwaway stories. Everything matters equally, which is, again, the show's core thesis applied to its own structure. The mundane and the epic are the same thing. The regular and the extraordinary are the same thing. Even the show's runtime proves its own point. And the viewing numbers for the finale tell their own story. Part 1 was watched by 1.33 million viewers. Parts 2 and 3 were each watched by 1.37 million. These weren't massive numbers by network television standards, but for a Cartoon Network show in its 8th season, airing on a Monday night in January, they were significant. And they represented the most watched episodes of the entire 8th season. The audience came back. After 8 seasons, after a controversial love triangle, after a shift to space, after all of it, the audience came back for the ending. They needed to know how it ended. They needed to say goodbye. And they did. 1.37 million people watched Pop sacrifice himself on a Monday night in January, and I'd bet a significant number of them cried. I want to talk about one more thing before I bring this home, and it's something that sits at the very bottom of the iceberg, because almost nobody thinks about it. The show's relationship with masculinity. Regular Show is fundamentally a show about men, about how men relate to each other, how they express affection, how they deal with failure and vulnerability. Mordecai and Rigby's friendship is the core of the show, and it's a friendship defined by all the things men are taught to avoid. Emotional honesty, vulnerability, admitting you need someone. These two characters love each other. They never say it in those words, but it's obvious in everything they do. Mordecai trains for days to win a stupid hat because Rigby is in a coma. Rigby jumps into literal lava to save Mordecai. They fight constantly. They undermine each other. They make each other's lives harder in 100 stupid ways, and none of that changes the fundamental truth that they would die for each other without a second thought. I want to dig into this a bit more because I think it's one of the show's most important contributions. Think about the other animated shows on Cartoon Network at the time. Adventure Time explored emotional vulnerability, sure, but through a fantasy lens that created distance between the characters and the audience. Steven Universe tackled feelings head-on, but with a cast that included magical alien beings. Regular Show is the only one that did it with characters who were basically just dudes. Normal dudes with normal jobs and normal insecurities. There's no magic prophecy that forces them to be emotionally open. There's no coming-of-age narrative that requires them to process their feelings. They just do it, naturally, as a function of who they are and the situations they find themselves in. And that's revolutionary for a show with a predominantly male cast on a network predominantly watched by boys. It normalizes emotional expression in a context where it's usually absent. Boys watching Regular Show saw male characters cry, hug, express fear, admit they were wrong, and say they cared about each other. And none of it was framed as weakness. All of it was framed as strength, as the right thing to do, as the thing that saves the day. And the show extends this to every male relationship. Benson cares about his employees, even though he can't express it without yelling. Muscleman's "my mom" jokes are a defense mechanism, a way to deflect attention from real feelings. Skip's stoicism is a response to centuries of loss. Pops's childlike openness is the most radical expression of masculinity on the show, a man who is unafraid to be gentle in a world that doesn't reward gentleness. Every man on this show is navigating the same basic problem. How do you be a man in a world that tells you men don't have feelings? And the show's answer, delivered quietly through 8 seasons of cartoon chaos, is that you just have the feelings anyway. You just care about people, and you show up for them, and you let yourself be hurt, and you keep going. That's it. That's the whole thing. Regular Show never lectures you about this. It never has a very special episode about male vulnerability. It just shows you, again and again and again, men being there for each other in moments that matter. And by the end, when these characters have saved the universe through an act of love, when Pops literally hugs evil to death, the show's thesis on masculinity is clear. The strongest thing a man can do is love someone enough to be vulnerable. The most powerful weapon in the universe isn't a fist or a weapon or cosmic energy. It's a hug. And honestly, I think that message has landed for a lot of people in ways they might not even consciously realize. If you grew up watching Regular Show, if you watched Mordecai and Rigby navigate their friendship across 8 seasons, if you saw Pops sacrifice himself with an embrace, then somewhere in your subconscious, there's a version of masculinity that includes warmth and vulnerability and emotional honesty. And that's a gift. That's what good storytelling does. It plants something inside you that grows without you noticing. Okay, I think I need to talk about one final thing before I close this out. And it's the thing at the very bottom of the iceberg. The thing underneath everything else. Regular Show is a show about time, about how it passes, about how it changes you, about how you can't stop it. The characters start the show in their 20s, stuck in a loop of menial work and supernatural chaos. And by the end, they're in space, fighting for the fate of existence. And then it's 25 years later and they're middle-aged and they have families and Pops is a statue. Time did what time always does. It moved forward and it left the park behind. The show's use of nostalgia isn't just aesthetic. It isn't just, hey, remember the 80s? The 80s references are there because the show is fundamentally about looking back, about the feeling of remembering a time when everything was simpler and stranger and more alive. Mordecai and Rigby's whole dynamic is built on nostalgia, on 2 guys who would rather relive their teenage years playing video games than face the responsibilities of adulthood. And the show loves them for that. But it also knows that they can't stay there forever. The park is childhood. Space is the unknown future. And the 25-year epilogue is the acceptance that time has passed and you've become someone new. This is why the cassette tape metaphor works so perfectly. A cassette tape is a relic. It's from an era that's already gone. And when the tape ejects at the end of the finale, it's not just the show ending. It's the acknowledgement that everything you've just experienced exists in the past tense. The Regular Show has been watched. The tape is done. You can rewind it, sure. You can watch it again. But you can't go back to the first time you heard it. You can't unhear the music. I think about this every time I rewatch the finale. That moment when the tape pops out and Pop says, "Jolly good show." Because he's not just talking to the characters. He's talking to us. To everyone who watched. To everyone who grew up with this show. He's saying, it was good. The time you spent here was good. And now, you have to keep living. And look, I know this is a lot of weight to put on a cartoon about a blue jay and a raccoon. I know that. But the weight is there whether I point it out or not. J.G. Quintel built something that operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it's funny. Below that, it's emotionally rich. Below that, it's mythologically complex. And at the very bottom, it's a meditation on time and memory and what it means to grow up. That's why people keep coming back to it. That's why the iceberg goes this deep. That's why we're still talking about it in 2026. The show started as a hallucination in a student film. It became 244 episodes on Cartoon Network. It won an Emmy. It got banned in Russia. It produced a movie, a comic series, and a revival show. It made millions of people care about a friendship between a blue jay and a raccoon. It took a gumball machine and made him one of the most relatable characters in animation history. It took a lollipop man and made him the savior of the universe. And it ended with a cassette tape and a gentle voice saying it was all worth it. Let me talk about one more abyss-level topic before I bring this home. The Boom Studios comics. After the show ended, Boom! Studios published several Regular Show comic series, including Regular Show, 25 years later, a 6-issue miniseries released between June and November 2018, written by Christopher Hastings and illustrated by Sina Grace. The comic picks up in the post-finale timeline and follows Mordecai, Rigby, and the rest of the crew returning to the park for a reunion 25 years later. And then things get weird again, because of course they do. The characters stumble into a fairy world, get de-aged, and have to deal with their children being stolen by a fairy king named Alberich. It's a whole thing. And the comics are interesting because they exist in a weird canonical limbo. They're officially licensed, but they're not written by Quintel. They expand on the characters and the world, but they don't carry the same creative authority as the show. And now that The Lost Tapes is coming, the comics occupy an even stranger space. Are they canon? Are they supplementary? Are they an alternate timeline? The show never really addressed them, and the revival probably won't either. But they exist. They're part of the iceberg. And for fans who wanted more regular show content during the 9-year gap between the finale and the revival, they were the only game in town. There's also something to be said about the fan community that kept the show alive during those 9 years. The Reddit threads, the YouTube essays, the fan art, the memes. Regular Show never fully disappeared from the cultural conversation because the fans wouldn't let it. They kept analyzing it, reinterpreting it, finding new things to discuss. And when the revival was announced at Annecy in 2024, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Not because people were nostalgic for a product, because they had a genuine emotional connection to these characters and this world, and the idea of getting to spend more time with them felt like reconnecting with old friends. That's the power of what Quintel built. It's not just a show people watched. It's a show people loved, actively, personally, deeply loved. And you can't fake that. You can't manufacture that through marketing or hype. That kind of connection only comes from authentic, emotionally honest storytelling. I keep coming back to Quintel and Marin in that CalArt studio, throwing titles into a hat at midnight. I keep thinking about 2 students with no idea that their silly shorts would become a cultural touchstone. About 2 in the AM/PM and the naive man from Lollyland, and all those little seeds that grew into something so much bigger than anyone could have predicted. There's something about the origin that mirrors the show's own philosophy. You start with something ordinary, something random, something you pull from a hat at midnight. And if you commit to it fully, if you pour everything you have into it, it becomes extraordinary. It becomes 8 seasons. It becomes a universe. It becomes the show that a generation fell asleep to. And I realize now that the title of this video is Fall Asleep to the Regular Show Iceberg Explained. And I hope some of you have. I hope some of you drifted off somewhere around the mid-tier, somewhere around Benson's drum solo, or the Baby Duck trilogy, because that means the show is still doing what it always did, keeping you company in the dark, being there for you when the world is too quiet and your brain won't stop. That's what Regular Show was always about, really. Just being there, being present with someone when everything else is uncertain. 2 guys on a couch playing video games while the universe burns outside. That's the whole show. That's the whole iceberg. So here we are, at the bottom, looking up through all those layers. And I think if Pops could see this, if he could see all of us still here, still thinking about his show, still pulling apart the threads and finding new things to love, he'd say exactly what he always says. Jolly good show. And he'd mean it. And before I close this out, I want to circle all the way back to the surface and make one final observation. The title, Regular Show. 2 words, completely unremarkable. It's the most generic possible name for a television program. And that's the whole joke. And it's also the whole thesis. The show is called Regular because it wants you to think it's ordinary. It presents itself as ordinary. Its characters think they're ordinary. And the entire run of the series is an 8-season argument that nothing is ordinary, that regular doesn't exist, that every single day, even at a dead-end job at a park, contains the potential for the extraordinary. The title is a lie, a beautiful, deliberate, sustained lie. And the moment you realize that, the whole show opens up in a new way. I also want to mention, because it connects to everything we've been talking about, that the show's ending is structured as a loop that breaks. The universe has been resetting for billions of years. Pops and anti-Pops fight. The fight stalemates. Everything starts over. That's a loop. And what breaks the loop is love. Pops hugging his brother, choosing connection over combat. That's the moment the cycle ends. And if you think about it, the characters in Regular Show were in their own loop for most of the series. Same job, same park, same routine, same escalation, same reset. The episodic structure of the show mirrors the cosmic cycle of the universe within the show. Every episode resets. Every week, Mordecai and Rigby start from the same place. And what breaks their loop is the same thing that breaks the cosmic one: growth, love, and the willingness to let go of what's comfortable. The structure of the show is its content. The form is the meaning. That's not something you see in most television, animated or otherwise. The fact that a Cartoon Network show about a blue jay and a raccoon achieved that level of structural poetry is, I think, one of the most underappreciated accomplishments in the history of American animation. And before I start pulling us back toward the surface, I want to sit in this abyss for a while longer, because there are a few more things down here that deserve to be said. Things about where the show came from creatively, where it's ended up culturally, and what it all means now that we're sitting here in 2026, 9 years removed from that cassette tape ejecting for the first time. Let me tell you about a British roommate. Because I think this is one of the most underappreciated origin points for the show's entire comedic DNA. When Quintel was at CalArts, his roommate was British, and this roommate introduced him to a whole world of UK comedy that Quintel had never been exposed to. The League of Gentlemen, The IT Crowd, Little Britain, The Office, the original one, and most importantly, The Mighty Boosh. Quintel has said in interviews that The Mighty Boosh was hugely influential, that it set a bar for surreal comedy, for doing dark, absurd, crazy stuff, and keeping it all completely straight-faced. And when you know that, Regular Show clicks into place in a way it didn't before. Because the show's approach to humor isn't purely American. It's not just Beavis and Butthead, which Quintel also loved. It's not just The Simpsons, which he grew up watching. It's this specific hybrid of American slacker comedy and British surrealism. The mundane setups are American. The insane escalations have that British willingness to let things get truly weird without winking at the camera. The show never breaks character. It never says, "Isn't this crazy?" It just presents a giant floating bearded head exploding, or a demonic taxi chasing someone through the streets with the same deadpan commitment that the Mighty Boosh brings to a jazz-playing gorilla or a talking moon. That tonal lineage, from the Mighty Boosh through a CalArts dorm room to Cartoon Network, is something most fans have no idea about. But it explains so much about why Regular Show feels different from every other American animated comedy. The humor has depth because it has roots in two completely different comedic traditions, and Quintel figured out how to weave them together so seamlessly that you can't see the seams. And while we're down here talking about influences, let me bring up something about the show's relationship with gaming that goes beyond what I covered earlier. In 2013, WayForward Technologies developed a game called Regular Show, Mordecai and Rigby in 8-bit land for the Nintendo 3DS. And the thing about this game is that it's not a lazy cash-in. WayForward is a studio with genuine retro gaming credibility. They made Shantae. They made Contra 4. And the Regular Show game they produced is a legitimate side-scrolling platformer that switches between Mordecai's horizontal stages and Rigby's vertical climbing stages, with visual styles that shift between top-down shooters and classic 8-bit aesthetics. The game was designed to look and feel like the kind of game Mordecai and Rigby would actually play. It's a game within a game, a simulation of the gaming culture that the show celebrates, and the care that went into making it feel authentic says something about how seriously the creative team took their own references. They weren't just name-dropping arcade culture, they were honoring it. And then, just this past January, in 2026, something happened that proved the show's cultural footprint hasn't faded at all. Mordecai and Skips became playable skins in Fortnite, with Rigby showing up as a sidekick. Chapter 7. The Regular Show bundle was available for a week, and it sold out fast. Now, you can argue about whether Fortnite collaborations cheapen the source material or amplify it. And people have that argument about every franchise that gets the Fortnite treatment. But what I think is significant is the timing. This happened in January 2026, nearly 9 years after the show ended, and the demand was immediate. People who grew up watching Regular Show are in their 20s now, and a lot of them play Fortnite. And seeing Mordecai running around a Battle Royale island felt like a collision of two different eras of their lives. The kid who watched the Blue Jay slack off at a park is now the adult who's dropping into Tilted Towers as the Blue Jay. There's something almost poetic about that. The show about wasting time at work has become a skin you wear while wasting time in a video game. Mordecai would approve. And speaking of the show's continuing presence, let me talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough. The fan preservation effort. During the 9 years between the finale and the Lost Tapes announcement, the Regular Show fan community did something remarkable. They cataloged everything. Every pop culture reference across all 244 episodes. Every censorship change across every international broadcast. Every hidden visual detail. Every background poster. Every clock showing a specific time. The Regular Show Wiki became one of the most meticulously maintained fan databases for any animated series. And it wasn't just data collection, it was analysis. People wrote thousands of words about the thematic significance of individual episodes. They mapped the emotional arcs of characters across seasons. They built timelines of the show's hidden continuity. And they did this not because anyone asked them to, but because the show inspired that level of care. When something is made with genuine love and attention to detail, the audience responds in kind. The depth of the fan analysis mirrors the depth of the show itself. Quintel hid things in every frame because he cared, and the fans found them because they cared too. That reciprocal relationship between creator and audience is, I think, the real legacy of Regular Show. Not the awards, not the ratings, not the merchandise. The legacy is that the show treated its audience with respect, and the audience returned that respect with a level of engagement that kept the show alive for nearly a decade after it ended. I also want to talk about Sean Sealis, because his name comes up in the credits of the Lost Tapes as an executive producer alongside Quintel and Sam Register, and most casual fans have no idea who he is. Sealis started on Regular Show as a storyboard artist, boarding episodes across the first 4 seasons. But he was also the show's primary songwriter. He composed and sang most of the original songs, including Party Tonight and Summertime, Loving Loving in the Summer. Time. When you hear those songs in the show, that's Sealis. The voice behind the music that scored some of the show's most emotional moments was the same guy drawing the storyboards. That kind of overlap between disciplines, where the person making the music is also shaping the visual storytelling, creates a unity of vision that you can feel even if you can't articulate it. And the fact that Sealis is now an executive producer on the revival suggests that the Lost Tapes isn't just a corporate nostalgia play. It's being made by someone who helped build the original show from the ground up, someone who understands its rhythms and its heart. That continuity matters. It's the difference between a revival that feels like the real thing and one that feels like a cover band. And here's one more detail from the deep end that I want to share, because it's the kind of thing that changes how you think about the finale. Mordecai's wife, the Batwoman he marries in the 25-year time skip, the one fans know as Steph. She wasn't named in the show. She appears in a montage. She has no speaking lines. She's just there. And after the finale aired, fans went to Reddit and asked the head writer, Matt Price, who she was. And he said her name was Steph. Just like that. On Reddit. One of the most important characters in the show's final act was named in a Reddit comment. And another writer, Owen Dennis, confirmed on Tumblr that there had never been a plan to give her a name in the show itself. She was always meant to be anonymous, a stranger, someone from Mordecai's future that we, the audience, don't get to know. And I think that's one of the bravest creative decisions in the entire series. The show spent 4 seasons building a love triangle, devoted countless episodes to Margaret and CJ, made Mordecai's romantic life one of its central arcs, and then said, actually, the person who matters most is someone you've never met and never will. That's not lazy writing. That's a statement. It's saying that your future doesn't belong to your past, that the most important person in your life might be someone who isn't in your story yet. Someone who walks into an art gallery at the right moment. Someone whose name you don't even know. I want to linger on Steph for one more second because there's a visual detail about the finale montage that I think goes unnoticed. When Mordecai meets Steph at the gallery, they're both showing artwork. They're both artists. They're equals. They're not in a dynamic where one person is pining and the other is oblivious. There's no power imbalance, no miscommunication, no sitcom-style misunderstanding. They just meet. They look at each other, and it works. After 8 seasons of Mordecai fumbling every romantic interaction, after the texts and the butt dials and the bad kisses and the jealousy and the mess, his actual love story is the simplest thing in the world. 2 people in a room who like the same things. No supernatural escalation required. And for a show that turns everything into a cosmic event, the fact that Mordecai's real love story is the most ordinary thing that happens in the entire finale is the most regular show thing possible. The extraordinary was disguised as the ordinary one last time. Let me also bring up one final fact that lives at this depth, and it's about the show's physical production in its later years. When Regular Show moved to its space arc in Season 8, the production team had to essentially rebuild the show's visual identity from scratch. The park was a setting that had been refined and detailed across 7 seasons. Every angle was familiar. Every background was established. And then they threw all of that away and put the characters in space. New backgrounds, new environments, new color palettes, new everything. For a show that was animated traditionally, on paper, that's an enormous amount of additional work. New settings mean new reference sheets, new layout designs, new everything for the overseas animation team to learn. And the team did it knowing the show was ending. They did all that extra work for a final season. That's not the decision of people who are coasting to the finish line. That's the decision of people who care about the work more than the convenience. And it shows. The space episodes look gorgeous. The cosmic environments have a scale and a beauty that the park episodes, for all their charm, never attempted. The show went out looking its absolute best, and it did it the hard way. There's a reading of the space arc that I haven't seen anyone else make, and I want to put it out there before we come back up. The park being launched into space is, on a literal level, a narrative escalation. But on a metaphorical level, it's about losing your foundation. The park was home. It was solid ground, and then it's ripped from the earth and thrown into the unknown. That's what happens when you leave the comfort of your 20s. The ground disappears, the familiar is gone, and you're floating, surrounded by a void, holding on to the people you love, because they're the only solid thing left. The space arc isn't just a setting change. It's the show's final metaphor. Growing up means losing your ground and learning to live in the void. And the only thing that makes the void bearable is the people floating with you. And the finale brings them back to Earth, literally. The park returns. The ground comes back. But the characters have changed. They've been through the void. They've lost Pops. They've faced the end of everything. And when they come back, they don't go back to the way things were. They go forward. They grow up. They leave the park. Because that's what the void teaches you. You can't go back to who you were before you lost your ground. You can only become who you're going to be after. Remember how I opened this by saying I'd been putting this off? That once I started pulling at this thread, I wasn't coming back? I was right. I've been down here for a while now, and every time I think I've found the bottom, there's another layer underneath. Another connection. Another hidden detail. Another reason to be amazed by what Quintel and his team built. And I think that's the ultimate point of an iceberg like this. You never really reach the bottom. There's always more to find. Always more to think about. Always another rewatch waiting. But I want to come back to something I said at the very beginning. The pitch. 2 guys work at a park. They slack off, and things get weird. I said that description tells you nothing about what's actually underneath. And now, you know what I meant. Underneath the slacking off is a meditation on what it means to work a job that doesn't fulfill you, but might save you anyway. Underneath the weirdness is a philosophy about how the mundane and the extraordinary are the same thing. Underneath the cartoon, animals are the most human characters I've ever encountered in animation. A gumball machine who learned to yell because his father never listened. A Yeti who skips everywhere because the woman he loved died centuries ago. A lollipop man who is the embodiment of cosmic good, and whose final act is to hug his own destruction and fall into a star. And two best friends who would jump into lava for each other, who built a time machine in high school, who lost their futures and found something better at a park nobody else thought mattered. That's what's underneath. That's what the ocean actually looks like when you go below the surface. I started this video by telling you to settle in, to get comfortable, to let the screen go dark if you want. And I hope you did. I hope the screen has been dark for a while now, and my voice has just been here, keeping you company the way the show always did. Because that's really all this is. Someone sitting with you in the dark, talking about something they love, hoping it means as much to you as it does to them. Regular Show taught me that the people you waste time with are the people who matter most. That the job isn't the point. The people are. That the detour might be the actual destination. That growing up doesn't mean leaving behind the things you love. It means carrying them with you into whatever comes next. And that every single day, even the boring ones, even the hard ones, even the ones where nothing seems to happen, is a show worth watching. A jolly good show. But for tonight, I think we've gone deep enough. And if you're still awake, I want to say thank you, genuinely. From the bottom of this iceberg, thank you. These deep dives only happen because people like you stick around and listen. And that means more to me than I can express properly at this hour of the night. You being here, whether you've been awake for the whole thing or you're just catching this last part before you drift off, it matters to me. If you enjoyed this, if you learned something you didn't know, if you're lying in bed right now, seeing a blue jay and a raccoon in a slightly different light, then I've done my job. And if you can't sleep, well, that's what the next video is for. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one. And hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd really appreciate it. It helps more than you'd think, and it means I get to keep doing this. Good night. Jolly good show. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.